Chapter 1. Uchiha Nathan. Nathan awoke in a dimly lit room, blinking at unfamiliar wooden walls and the soft glow of paper-paneled windows. Confusion swirled in his mind. Where am I? Images and words tumbled in. Ninja, Konohakure, Uchiha clan. With every fragment of memory, the truth settled like cold water over his head. He traveled through time, somehow slipping into another boy's body. The original owner was also named Nathan, a 10-year-old fourth grader at the Ninja Academy and a member of Konogakure's renowned Uchiha clan. That very afternoon, the boy's parents had fallen in battle, and in his grief, he died. Now Nathan's consciousness occupied this young shinobi's life. The realities of the shinobi world pressed in on him. It was the height of the Third Great Ninja War, and the Uchiha were both revered and feared for their Sharingan. Nathan, stranger in a familiar land, had inherited not only a new name, but a legacy of power and responsibility. Rising from the tatami mat, he pressed his palm to his chest and felt the steady beat of youth and possibility. Though the road ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, one thing was clear: he would survive. He would master whatever abilities this world demanded, honor the Uchiha name, and forge a path back home. With that resolve ignited, Nathan stepped forward into the corridors of the Uchiha compound, determined to embrace his unexpected destiny. A single word sums up this era: peril. In these chaotic times, no one is safe, not the poorest civilian, nor even the highest-ranking shinobi. And now that Nathan occupies the body of an Uchiha, he feels even more vulnerable. Even in the strongest of hidden villages, Konoha, survival is never guaranteed. Worse still, the Uchiha clan, Nathan's new family, is still shrouded in suspicion after their betrayal and near annihilation during the Fourth Great Ninja War. It's like living under a leaky roof in an endless downpour. Nathan ran a hand through his hair and muttered, "I thought dying of overwork would be tragic enough. Now this." He paused, gathering his thoughts. Extraordinary power? He'd caught a glimpse of that just moments ago. And yet, despite the massive emotional shock the original body had suffered, the Sharingan hadn't awakened. That wasn't just disappointing, it was outright pathetic. Sure, he possessed some chakra, but in the final analysis, it all comes down to bloodline. The closer your heritage is to Kaguya Tsutsuki, the higher your true potential, and Nathan wasn't convinced his new lineage would carry him very far. Nathan sank into his chair, staring at the empty training grounds beyond the window. In a few weeks, he'd be just like Metkai, a one-hit wonder whose name everyone forgot. Saving the world? He didn't even know where to begin. He'd always believed he had some talent, but right now it felt negligible. There was no secret technique, no hidden power he could lean on. Certainly nothing like Orochimaru's twisted genius. "If only I had a golden finger," he muttered under his breath. He racked his brain for solutions, but night settled without answers. Finally, he let out a frustrated sigh, and in that instant, a translucent, pale blue panel shimmered into view before his eyes. Name: Uchiha Nathan, age 10 years old, Constitution, 5 Spirit, 7, Chakra, 60, Bloodline, Sharingan unawakened, Skills, none. Nathan bolted upright. "A system panel?" he gasped. Every ounce of doubt he'd felt just moments ago was gone. He still had no clue what this thing's purpose was or how to use it, but at last, there was hope. Nathan stared at the floating numbers before him, mentally reviewing their meaning. The first stat, physical potential, measured everything from stamina and reflexes to muscle density and bone strength. The second, chakra aptitude, gauged his spiritual energy and its control. In the average person, both values sit around 3 points. Anyone surpassing that threshold earns the right to train as a shinobi. His own readings blinked back at him. Physical potential, 5 points. Chakra aptitude, 7. On the surface, these should mark him a promising candidate. 5 is an impressive physique for a civilian youth, and 7 is well above average in chakra control. But Nathan knew better. He'd inherited pure Uchiha blood, and among his clan, 5 points in raw strength was unremarkable at best. If anything, his physique should be higher, 8, even 9. And yet, despite the clan's legendary prowess, his Sharingan had never awakened. That alone told him these numbers were misleading. He frowned, recalling the moment he'd first seen the gauge appear in his mind. It hadn't been there before, at least not in the same form. Nathan suspected that his arrival, his sudden rebirth into this body, had skewed the readings, inflating his chakra score to 7 so that he'd believe himself powerful enough to advance. Otherwise, how could he explain both the dormant Sharingan and the underwhelming physique? A pang of guilt tugged at him as memories of the original Nathan, his parents' only son, flashed through his mind. They died protecting the village, their last thoughts filled with pride and heartbreak over their son's fate. Nathan inhaled sharply. Whatever truth these stats concealed, he owed it to their sacrifice to uncover it and to prove he was worthy of the Uchiha name. Nathan frowned. They couldn't all be faking their emotions, yet his predecessor's Sharingan was only half awakened. The only conclusion was that this body's potential was simply too weak. With no other explanation, the problem rested squarely on Nathan's shoulders. He scanned his skill menu, but it was completely empty. According to the memories he'd inherited, several abilities should have appeared here. Even with his modest Uchiha talent, he ought to have been able to learn the basic shadow clone technique. Confusion churned in his mind. Were those memories mere delusions? If it weren't for the unmistakable flow of chakra through his meridians, he might have dismissed them outright. Still puzzled, Nathan rose to his feet. Drawing on the hazy recollections stored in his mind, he concentrated his chakra and formed the 3 seals of Bunshin no Jutsu. He expected the familiar surge of energy, but after the chakra drained away, nothing happened. His attempt at the clone technique had failed. Nathan narrowed his eyes as he stared at the skill bar on his status panel. A moment of distortion passed, and then a fresh entry appeared. Clone technique of bought 0-100. Could it be because I haven't actually tried it yet? He murmured. Determined, he gathered his chakra and formed the hand seals for the clone technique once more. As before, the imitation vanished almost immediately, no surprise there. He remained calm, however, and glanced back at the panel. The proficiency indicator beside the clone technique had ticked upward from 100 to 3-100. Nathan frowned thoughtfully. So that was how it worked. The parentheses tracked his mastery of the skill. And the 2-point jump? He suspected it was tied to the memories flooding his mind. Like reclaiming forgotten strength, it made his initial progress somewhat erratic. With that hypothesis in mind, he prepared to test it again. Nathan drew in a slow, steadying breath, willing his restless thoughts to settle. He reached back into the recesses of his mind to the memories of a past life, specifically, the countless hours he'd spent mastering the clone technique, and began to reconstruct it. For several tense seconds, the air around him crackled with latent energy. Then, abruptly, a wisp of chakra smoke coalesced before vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. His attempt had failed. Still, Nathan felt a spark of encouragement when he glanced at his progress meter. Clone technique, level 0, 6-100s. He'd gained 3 points. His theory was proving correct. By repeatedly recalling and practicing every jutsu he'd once known, he could expedite the process of reclaiming those lost skills, and in doing so, explain away the strange aura emanating from his body. After all, the Shinobi world team, ed with mind reading and soul enchantment techniques. Should his peculiar chakra signature draw unwanted scrutiny, he might soon find himself in an Anbu interrogation cell. It was an unlikely outcome, but Nathan knew better than to court even the slightest risk. Caution, he reminded himself, was the shinobi's greatest asset. Chapter 2. Going to School. Continue. Nathan snapped back to the task at hand and raised his hand to practice the clone technique once more. He formed the required hand seal, but immediately felt the familiar emptiness in his core. His chakra reserves were completely spent. There wasn't a drop left to fuel another clone. He summoned his proficiency panel and studied the readout. Just as he feared, the chakra bar sat at 0. Taking a steadying breath, Nathan folded his legs and settled into a meditative posture. He closed his eyes and turned his awareness inward, concentrating on the subtle surge of physical energy generated by his own cells. With deliberate focus, he drew that energy inward, then wove it together with his spiritual energy. In an instant, they merged into fresh chakra and flowed through his meridians, replenishing his reserves. An hour later, Nathan opened his eyes. "Panel," he ordered silently. The holographic interface flickered into view once more, ready to display his progress. Nathan Uchiha glanced at his status panel one more time. Name, Nathan Uchiha. Age 10, Constitution, 5 Spirit, Chakra 2, 52 Bloodline, Sharingan, Unawakened, 5100. Skills, Chakra Refining Technique, Level 10, 100. Clone Technique, Level 6, 100. He smiled to himself. Ever since mastering the basic clone technique, a new skill, Chakra Refining Technique, had appeared on his panel. At level 0, it would permanently raise his chakra capacity by 1 point and restore 50 chakra every hour he spent refining. In time, as the technique's proficiency increased, both effects would grow stronger. Nathan knew he might not advance as quickly as some born geniuses, but with steady effort, who could say what the future held? Wasting no more time, he settled into meditation. He closed his eyes, calmed his mind, and focused on drawing chakra inward, molding, tempering, and storing it within his dantian. Minute after minute, he sat perfectly still, heedless of the cool breeze rustling through the trees. An hour later, Nathan's eyes snapped open. His chakra gauge blinked near full capacity. Grinning, he released his focus. "That's enough for today," he whispered. Chakra wasn't created from nothing. He'd done all he could for now. Carefully, he cataloged the experience in his mind, eager to see how far this new technique would carry him. Nathan pressed a hand to his forehead as he sat up. The refining ritual had drained him, every ounce of physical and mental energy sapped in the process. Fusing the memories of his predecessor had been especially taxing, and in the moments that followed, he'd spent more energy probing the panel interface, searching for shortcuts and countermeasures. His spirit felt frayed, and though pushing on now wouldn't damage his core, he knew it would be wildly inefficient. Better to rest and recover, yet he couldn't afford to let all that chakra go to waste. Steeling himself, Nathan forced his mind back into focus. He replayed the memory of the clone technique over and over inside his head, committing each hand seal and chakra flow to muscle memory. With a deep breath, he sealed away the rest of his reserves and launched his first attempt. Nothing happened. He tried again, and again, 5 times in all, only to feel his chakra pool collapse before any clone could form. He sighed, wiping sweat from his brow. Even under the best circumstances, a dedicated Ninja Academy student might spend years mastering the 3-body shadow clone technique. For an outsider like him, even with the advantage of past life memories, to nail it after half a dozen tries had always been wishful thinking. He stood and flexed his aching muscles, then glanced at the glowing proficiency gauge floating before him. 80%. He'd come this far, but he wasn't there yet. Nathan folded his arms, determination flickering in his eyes. He'd rest briefly, conserve his chakra, and next time, he would break through that final barrier. Nathan sat quietly, the cool night air brushing against his face as he stared at the moonlit sky. Despite the speed of his recent breakthroughs, one thing still held him back: his chakra reserves. Building up more chakra wasn't something that could happen overnight. He wasn't a prodigy, after all. Even so, his pool was remarkably large for a 10-year-old. All he could do was continue step by step. Shaking off his worries, Nathan rose to wash up before bed. Back in his room, exhaustion quickly overtook him, and the soft rhythm of his snoring filled the silence. Outside the window, shadows shifted. A lone figure emerged under the moonlight, crimson eyes gleaming through the darkness. It was an Uchiha Shinobi, his 3 Tomoe Sharingan activated. He observed Nathan's sleeping form for a long moment, then slipped away as silently as he had come. At first light, Nathan awoke and immediately summoned his status panel. Name: Uchiha Nathan. Age: 10. Physique: 5 Spirit 7 Chakra 127. Bloodline: Sharingan. Unawakened: 5100. Skills: Chakra Refinement Technique Level 0. Duplication Technique Level 0, 19100. He blinked at the numbers, confirming it wasn't a dream. Relief washed over him, then his gaze settled on the chakra stat once more. There was work to be done. Nathan woke up the next morning to find his chakra reserves had replenished by more than 30 points, even without any deliberate chakra refinement. He resisted the urge to spend it immediately. Today was a school day, and he'd rather have that extra chakra in reserve than risk drawing attention by using it in public. He briefly considered taking some time off to delve into the legacy left behind by his predecessor. But ditching classes would only invite questions and suspicion. Better to keep up appearances, If he displayed unexpected abilities at the academy, he could always chalk it up to a sudden breakthrough in training. Staying at home, on the other hand, would look even more suspicious if visitors showed up at the Uchiha compound. After weighing his options, Nathan decided to attend school as usual and keep a low profile. With the plan settled, he packed his satchel, grabbed a quick breakfast, and set off. The Uchiha estate still occupied its central spot in the village, just a short walk from the ninja academy. In no time at all, Nathan was weaving through familiar lanes, heading toward another ordinary day at school, though he knew this time he'd be ready for anything. Nathan reached the classroom just as he remembered. Passing a few familiar faces in the hallway, he offered a casual nod in reply to their greetings. Fortunately, his predecessor, much like most Uchiha clan ninjas, had kept to himself, so Nathan's own efforts to fly under the radar wouldn't be too conspicuous. 10 minutes later, the school bell chimed. A young-looking ninja in his 20s strode through the door. This was Shanmu Yiteng, their homeroom teacher. According to the notes Nathan had inherited, Shanmu treated every student with impartiality, no special favors, no obvious bias. That was a relief, since the Uchiha name carried its own share of rumors. Nathan let himself relax until Shanmu's gaze flicked in his direction. The unexpected look sent a quick jolt through Nathan's chest. Shanmu only glanced once before turning to the front, but the moment had been long enough. As the lesson began, Nathan found himself staring at the teacher's back instead of listening to the lecture. He couldn't shake the feeling that Shanmu's eyes weren't merely sweeping the room at random, they were tracking him. Had his cover been blown so quickly? Unease coiled in his stomach as he forced himself to focus on the day's material, determined to figure out just what the homeroom teacher had seen. The soft chime of the dismissal bell snapped Nathan from his daydream. He blinked, realizing with a start that the entire class had passed while he dozed off. Mr. Shanmu Yiteng shot him a reproving look, called out, "Class dismissed," and slipped out of the room. As Nathan's homeroom teacher, Mr. Kai, Shanmu already knew about the recent death of Nathan's parents. In Konoha, whenever a student loses a close family member, the village's higher-ups quietly inform the teachers. The whole point is to equip them to offer timely guidance and prevent grief from turning into something more dangerous. This morning, Mr. Shanmu had planned to talk privately with Nathan and help him process his loss. But late last night, a delegation of Uchiha clan Shinobi had arrived and asked him to hold his tongue. They insisted on giving Nathan no special encouragement, to see if he could awaken the Sharingan on his own. To the clan's high-ranking members, discarding an underperforming relative was a small price to pay. If Nathan did manifest the coveted dujutsu, the Uchiha would reap immense rewards from his newfound power. So Mr. Shanmu complied, for the moment at least. As the classroom emptied around Nathan, he couldn't help wondering what the coming days would bring. They wouldn't let Shanmu Yiteng get involved. If it had been the future Iruka, he might have been able to withstand the pressure and guide Nathan, but Shanmu Yiteng was different. He didn't feel the same burden of responsibility and tended to drift along with whatever came his way. Nathan didn't understand all of this at first. He'd been racked with guilt over Shanmu Yiteng's unusually attentive behavior. But after mulling it over, he realized that Shanmu Yiteng probably meant no harm. He was simply more considerate once he learned about Nathan's parents' tragic fate. Ring. Startled by the sudden call, Nathan finally allowed himself a deep, relieved breath. Chapter 3. Basic Physical Skills. Morning slipped away in the blink of an eye. At Nathan's Ninja Academy, theory filled the forenoon, while the afternoons were reserved for hands-on training. Thanks to the instructor's guidance and to his own memories from a past life, Nathan barely managed to keep up with the rapid-fire lectures. But he knew the real challenge lay in the practical drills. As long as the triple body technique wasn't being examined, he could pretty much coast through. From his recollection, that particular test came around once a week, and in the meantime, the instructors focused on combat fundamentals and the use of ninja tools. Since the last triple body exam had been 3 days ago, he had nothing to worry about, for now. When the next one rolled around in 4 days, he'd be ready. By then, he planned to have the shadow clone technique solidly under his belt, and that alone would guarantee he passed. By early afternoon, the students spilled onto the training grounds. Standing before them was Shanmu Yiteng, the instructor in charge of their physical drills. He surveyed the more than 30 trainees with a steely gaze and raised his voice so everyone could hear. "Today we'll split into teams for sparring matches," he announced. "You will not stop fighting until I call the halt. Understood?" A murmur of assent rippled through the ranks as Nathan settled into his fighting stance, already calculating how best to apply his memory of past life techniques in every exchange. Even if you lose, you must get back up and keep fighting. Do you understand? The moment the instructor's words rang out, the students below burst into murmurs of protest. Until now, every sparring match had been conducted in teams, with Shanmu Yiteng watching over them, commenting, analyzing, ensuring no one fell behind. But this was different. Now they were expected to face off one-on-one, with no chance to withdraw. It was uncharted territory. Nathan wasn't sure how his classmates felt, but he could sense the urgency in the air. This kind of grueling, no-retreat training was normally reserved for 5th or even 6th-year students. Asking 1st through 4th years to endure it meant the school had dramatically accelerated the curriculum. Given the state of the ninja world, the reasoning was clear. They were being fast-tracked toward graduation. In peacetime, a 6-year training program made sense, but in wartime, with the front lines desperate for reinforcements, every month counted. Shortening their time in school was inevitable. If I remember correctly, Konoha's annual graduation exams are scheduled for October 7th through the 10th, Nathan thought, staring at the calendar. The results go up to the Hokage 3 days later, and once he signs off, they'll be official on October 15th. It's only September 3rd today. I've got just over a month to graduate. A knot of urgency formed in his chest. "Quiet down," boomed Sugemu Ichiteng from the front of the classroom. The clamor died instantly as every student turned to face him. "I'm about to assign your training pairs. Listen carefully." He lifted a roster. Hanada Inumichi. Inumichi, a broad-shouldered boy, stepped forward. Sugemu scanned his list. Hirai Matsu. Matsu rose and joined Inumichi before the class. "You two will work together." "Inumichi, Hirai," they chorused, bowing respectfully. "Yes, sensei." Sugemu continued down the list. Yamano Hana, Aoki Ryuko. One by one, students were called up and paired off. Murmurs of anticipation flitted through the rows, but no one dared interrupt the teacher. Within minutes, the entire class had been divided into teams. Now all Nathan had to do was wait for his own name to be called, and hope his partner would help him reach that October deadline. Nathan was paired with a civilian ninja named Morimu Jie. From all accounts, Morimu's qualifications were solid. He was every bit as skilled as Nathan's predecessor. But that was exactly why Nathan felt no confidence in winning. Morimu might look like a 10-year-old, yet he far outstripped Na than in combat experience. After all, Nathan's previous school hadn't trained him in fighting. Thankfully, Nathan's mature mindset kept him calm. A crackle came over the comm from Shanmu Yiteng. "Remember, no weapons in the next battle." Nathan let out a relieved breath. Even though the training kunai were blunt, a strike to the vitals could still hurt. He needed these matches to build real experience, but there was no reason to suffer more than necessary. He wasn't a masochist, only someone who was willing to learn, even if it meant taking a few hits. He just hoped the beating would be worth it. Nathan flicked open his status panel to check his progress. If he guessed right, today's fight would unlock a new skill. Then Shanmu Yiteng's voice came again. "Ready? Form the opposition seal." Nathan and Senmu Jie both raised their right hands, weaving their fingers into the seal of opposition. "Begin!" Shanmu Yiteng stepped back, signaling the start. In the next heartbeat, Senmu Jie lunged forward with a brutal right hook aimed at Nathan's jaw. Though Nathan had braced himself, the speed still caught him off guard. At the last split second, whether by muscle memory or the echo of a past life, he twisted aside, letting the punch sail past. Almost without thinking, he unleashed a quick counter-strike, his fist snapping into Senmu Jie's jaw. The sharp crack of bone against bone rang out. Senmu Jie reacted instantly, raising his forearm to block. As their bodies slid by each other, he pivoted on his left foot, coiling his hips and twisting his torso 90 degrees. His right leg swept upward in a vicious arc, aiming straight for Nathan's head. The blast of wind from the kick whistled past Nathan's ear. Nathan barely ducked in time. Damn, this kid's ruthless, he thought, heart pounding. But he reminded himself this was more than a fight. It was a ninja duel, where every strike and parry teeters on the edge of a blade. To survive meant to embrace that cruelty, both giving and receiving it. Chapter 10, the adaptation phase. This was the adaptation phase, when Instructor Yiteng hadn't yet authorized weapons. Nathan knew that once real arms came into play, the fights would turn far deadlier. If he hoped to survive in this brutal new world, he had to learn and adjust at lightning speed. Otherwise, even with a prestigious proficiency panel at his disposal, he'd be nothing more than wasted potential. Putting all other concerns aside, Nathan immersed himself in the memories swirling in his mind, determined to absorb every fragment of his predecessor's legacy. On the old-school playground, the battle raged without pause. From time to time, desperate cries of pain rose into the air, but no matter how harrowing the screams, Instructor Yiteng refused to call a halt. Nathan was knocked down again and again. Thanks to his predecessor's experiences, he knew the theory. He even understood how to outmaneuver an opponent like Senmuji in a matter of seconds. In practice, though, his movements were still stiff and unrefined. Senmuji exploited every mistake mercilessly. Whether out of personal spite against Nathan's predecessor or pure cruelty, he showed no compassion. By the time the final bell rang, Nathan was aching from head to toe. Bruises covered his arms, legs, and torso, a stark reminder that in this world, raw skill and swift adaptation meant the difference between victory and defeat. Nathan rubbed his aching blue eyes as he padded down the street. Oddly enough, he felt no resentment. If anything, he felt a flicker of gratitude. No sooner had the thought crossed his mind than a new skill, basic taijutsu, materialized on his vision panel. With a single mental command, the panel sprang to life in a pale cobalt glow. Name, Uchiha Nathan, age 10, physique 5, spirit 7, chakra 6 127, bloodline Sharingan, unawakened skills. Skill, chakra refining technique, level 0, clone technique, 1900, basic taijutsu, level 0, 35 100. After just one brutal skirmish, Nathan's basic taijutsu had leapt to 35 out of 100, outrunning even his clone technique as the fastest-growing skill. Based on his predecessor's records, that level corresponded roughly to the very start of Tier 1. If he could push himself through 2 or 3 more fights like today's, he'd fully assimilate every ounce of his predecessor's taijutsu prowess. He owed this breakthrough to Morimuji's merciless onslaught. The sheer brutality of the encounter had forced Nathan to tap into every reserve of strength and speed he had, driving his basic taijutsu forward faster than he'd ever imagined. With this momentum behind him, the next battles would only come easier, at least in terms of sheer skill growth. Given the circumstances, how could Nathan possibly harbor any resentment toward them? Chapter 4. Throwing Ninja Tools. That night, Nathan sat alone in his room, utterly spent after another round of chakra refinement. He blinked warily, but he couldn't let himself rest. Drawing on the meager reserve of freshly restored chakra, he attempted the clone technique, one of the 3 foundational body arts. His movements were noticeably smoother than before, and this time he completed the hand seals in under 5 seconds, just enough to satisfy the Academy's minimum standard. Yet Nathan knew that mastering the seals was only half the battle. True proficiency in ninjutsu lay not in the seals themselves, but in the seamless control and transformation of chakra that followed. The hand signs merely directed that flow. A seasoned shinobi could simplify the ritual, eliminating certain seals altogether or performing them single-handed, so long as they maintained perfect chakra balance. Those advanced shortcuts, however, were beyond Nathan's reach. He hadn't even managed to produce a single functioning clone. He forced himself to stand up and try again, determined to learn to walk before he tried to run. Bang! A swirl of chakra mist dissolved into the air, leaving behind a warped figure beside him. The stranger's features mirrored Nathan's, though twisted and indistinct. Nathan studied the apparition without a flicker of reaction before launching into his next jutsu. Narrowing his eyes, he gathered chakra and formed the hand seals once more. Within seconds, another cloud of mist blossomed, and a second distorted double emerged. Relentlessly, Nathan repeated the shadow clone technique 5 times, each summoning draining roughly 20 points of chakra. By the time he finished, his reserves were nearly depleted. He took a steadying breath. With a silent thought, Nathan activated his chakra status panel. Name, Uchiha Nathan 10. Physique, 5 Spirit 7. Chakra, 11-131. Bloodline, sharing and unawakened, 51-100. Skills, Chakra Refining Technique, Level 0. Shadow Clone Technique, Level 0, 4600. Basic Taijutsu, Level 0. He recalled that during a 4-hour chakra refinement session earlier tonight, he'd raised his maximum chakra from 127 to 131 and recovered over 200 chakra points in total. Summoning those 5 clones had cost him almost every last drop. Nathan exhaled slowly, retrieved his water skin, and prepared for the next phase of his training, each shadow clone's 20-point toll, a clear reminder of the challenge that lay ahead. Nathan finished his 10th clone technique of the night, sweat beading on his brow. Thanks to the residual memories and insights inherited from his predecessor, each casting now netted him 2 to 3 points of proficiency. By the time he'd collapsed onto his tatami mat, he'd earned a full 27 points, adding to the 19 he'd already accumulated and pushing him to 46 points, well over the halfway mark to entry-level mastery. But there was more good news. His chakra refining technique, already progressing steadily, received an unexpected boon from that same stored wisdom. Instead of the 2 points he'd bargained for, he gained 6 in a single session. At this rate, maintaining 4 hours of disciplined practice each day, he calculated that he'd breach the entry threshold in just under 2 weeks. Once he did, the technique's effects would amplify, and his long-standing chakra shortage would begin to ease. With a healthier reserve, every other skill would accelerate in turn. Nathan allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He could almost see his future self moving faster, hitting harder, and mastering jutsu with increasing ease. But for tonight, he'd done enough. Slow and steady, he reminded himself, was the surest path to true strength. Tomorrow, he'd start again. Nathan toyed with the idea of pushing himself harder, staying up late each night, drilling the fundamentals of chakra refinement so he could break into the entry level ahead of schedule and hasten his growth. But what real difference would it make? His graduation was only days away. In such a short time, even if he trained non-stop, the most he could hope for was a low-ranking genin, or at best a newly minted chunin. Jonin was out of reach, and even then, would a single jonin's strength tip the scales in a war that spanned the entire ninja world? Unlikely. At most, he might influence one small battle, and as an outsider, any rapid improvement would draw unwanted attention, maybe even suspicion. Better to follow the proper path. Shaking his head, Nathan dismissed the thought. He left the study, returned to his room, and lay on his bed, gazing at the bright moon beyond the window. Soon, he drifted to sleep. The next afternoon, the students gathered again on the training field. But instead of sparring, instructor Sugimu Yiteng had a different lesson in mind: proper kunai and shuriken throwing. Each trainee stepped forward in turn, practicing grips, stances, and the precise flick of the wrist needed to send metal spinning true to its mark. In the rank of genin, there are really only 3 practical combat skills: hand-to-hand combat, swordplay, and, for those who can manage it, basic ninjutsu. Add the 3-body technique to that list, and you've got yourself a perfectly serviceable foot soldier. Trying to teach every advanced jutsu to every student would be a total waste of the academy's time and chakra. Take Uchiha Nathan, for example. Next to shinobi heirs from established clans, his talent looks average at best, but placed among ordinary civilians, he'd already be exceptional. If Nathan hadn't carried the extraordinary chakra reserves of someone who'd traveled through time, by the time he graduated his reserves would be all but spent, just enough left to pull off the 3-body technique a handful of times. Now imagine the other civilian students, most of whom have far less aptitude. Expecting them to master more intricate ninjutsu is unreasonable. It's not that the academy refuses to teach more advanced arts, it simply doesn't need to. Those born to ninja clans inherit their family's secret techniques and learn them at home. The few civilians who do show real potential are placed under elite jonin instructors for personalized training. That system frees the academy to concentrate on fundamentals, giving every gene in the skills they truly need to survive a battlefield. Instructor Shanmu Yiteng frowned as he surveyed the students. Besides, he mused aloud, this batch will probably graduate early. Their abilities won't match those of previous classes. There's really no point in spending too much time on them. Thwack! A kunai flew from Nathan's hand and struck the target dead center, 5 meters away. Nathan let out a long breath of relief. If he'd missed again, he'd never hear the end of it. Since the day he began his private practice sessions, Shanmu had been watching him like a hawk, just as he had during Nathan's sparring match with Morimukiche yesterday. Nathan knew his performance these last 2 days had been uncharacteristically strong. He'd even cobbled together a little trick to keep Shanmu from suspecting anything. Yet to his surprise, the instructor hadn't questioned him at all, as if Nathan wasn't even his student anymore. Part of him felt proud, another part felt oddly let down. Panel. With that single thought, Nathan's proficiency panel materialized in midair, its rows of stats and skills gleaming softly under the training hall's lights. Name, Nathan Uchiha, age 10, constitution 5, spirit 7, chakra 44, 131, bloodline Sharingan, unawakened, 5100 skills, chakra refining technique, level 0, 8, 100, duplicate technique, level 0, 46, 100, basic physical technique, level 0, 3500, ninja tool throwing, level 0, 100. Nathan steadied his breathing and hurled the kunai. As the blade struck the target with a muffled thunk, his skill panel flickered to life. Ninja tool throwing, level 000. A thrill ran through him. He retrieved a second kunai and sent it flying. It landed almost perfectly. The panel updated again. Ninja tool T, rowing, level 0 to 100. Nathan's eyes gleamed. If he guessed right, this would be his first genuine ninja skill. Even better, mastering tool throwing didn't cost any chakra. As long as he could keep throwing, he could rack up points quickly. No need to tap into his limited reserves. With that in mind, he reached for another kunai, determined to push his fledgling talent as far and as fast as he could. Nathan cast a quick glance at the distant cedar, wondering if anyone might be watching him. Would they see something that gave him away? He shook off the thought, gathered the kunai and shuriken he'd just thrown, and returned to the 10-meter mark. This time, he forced himself to focus completely. Even with the insight he'd gained moments ago, he still missed the bullseye repeatedly. Admittedly, each miss stalled his overall progress in mastering the throws, but it was a trade-off he was willing to make. After all, his predecessor had struggled with 10-meter targets too, missing far more often than at 5 meters. Given enough time to hone his technique, Nathan knew he'd build the same steady precision. Then no one would ever suspect a thing. Chapter 5. Entry in Pension Pant. A soft rush of displaced air and 6 shurikens sprang from Nathan's palm. They sliced through the space before embedding themselves dead center in the target. Proficiency +3, Nathan murmured, checking the floating readout only he could see. He just executed his newest technique, a simultaneous multi-shuriken, or kunai assault. If even one blade struck true, he earned extra points. Today, all 6 had hit. In under 2 hours, his ninja tool throwing skill skyrocketed from 0, 96 100 to 1, 100. Only 2 more successful drills and he'd be fully initiated. He exhaled and launched another volley. +2, +3, level up. As the notification blinked, Nathan felt as though he'd shattered a thin pane of glass in his mind, unlocking fresh insight into the art of projectile weapons. He'd experienced skill increases before, but never with such clarity or power. Trusting that new understanding, Nathan swept up a lone kunai, flicked his wrist, and sent it arcing toward the target, with barely a thought guiding it. The blade struck home with a satisfying thud. He allowed himself a small, triumphant smile. This was what it felt like to truly get started. Nathan stood before the practice target and sent a flurry of kunai and shuriken flying. One by one, the blades struck true, embedding themselves neatly in the bullseye. He leaned against the wall, casually opened his status panel, and the faint smile that had been playing on his lips vanished in an instant. Only a negligible bump in ninja tool proficiency. After throwing dozens of weapons, he'd barely advanced. Was it a level 1 cap, or something else entirely? Determined to uncover the truth, Nathan spent the next half hour running systematic trials. He varied his grip, adjusted his stance, tested each weapon type, and watched his proficiency bar crawl forward by the smallest fraction. Eventually, after countless throws, two factors became clear. First, the link to his predecessor's memories had reached its limit. All the hidden insights and experience that once accelerated his growth were now exhausted, leaving him to advance on his own. Second, and most importantly, his training had been far too casual. Only perfect strikes counted toward leveling up a level 1 ninja tool. Unless the blade punched dead center on a 10-meter target, the effort registered as nothing more than wasted motion. With the rules laid bare, Nathan squared his shoulders, retrieved a fresh kunai, and prepared to hone his aim with laser focus. From this point on, nothing less than a bullseye would do. Nathan studied the faint glow of the skill gauge hovering at the corner of his vision. Of the 12 weapons he'd just thrown, 6 kunai and 6 shuriken, only 1 shuriken had buried itself cleanly in the bullseye. The rest landed scattered around the target. Unsurprisingly, his proficiency bar inched forward by the barest sliver. It was proof enough that the gauge couldn't be tricked. Genuine strength required genuine effort. That, Nathan thought, was only fair. Few people lie down simply because they hate hard work. More often, they grind themselves to exhaustion, see no progress, and give up in despair. But if even the smallest drop of sweat earned a real return, he was convinced most would keep fighting. Tucking the thought away, he reset his stance at the throwing line and refocused on his ninja tool throwing drill. Striking a target at 10 meters posed no real challenge. Hitting its tiny center, however, demanded absolute precision. He drew in a steady breath, locked his gaze, and sent kunai flying one after another. Most thudded into the wooden frame's outer rings. Fewer than 1 in 10 pierced the heart of the target. Still, each success, however rare, fanned the flames of his determination, and he prepared to throw again. The final bell rang, and Nathan finally lowered his arm, blinking against the whirl of voices that filled the training yard. He leaned against the wall, wiped sweat from his brow, and summoned his status panel. Name: Uchiha Nathan. Age: 10, Constitution 5, Spirit 7, Chakra 21 131. Bloodline: Sharingan, unawakened 51/100. Skills: Chakra Refining Technique, Level 0, Clone Technique, Level 0, 4600. Basic Physical Skills, Level 0, 3500. Ninja Tool Throwing, Level 1, 29,200. A faint smile tugged at his lips. After only half an afternoon of relentless practice, his ninja tool throwing proficiency had jumped by 28 points. He'd also burned through more than 20 chakra just to keep his limbs from trembling. No ordinary endurance test, but he'd made it through. At this pace, Nathan realized he'd hit level 2 in less than a week. By then, his throwing skills would rival those of sixth-year students from any previous class. Graduate early or not, he'd be more than capable of defending himself. And that thought alone was worth every drop of sweat. Nathan knew that mastering shuriken throwing alone wouldn't be enough. He had to keep up his basic physical training and, just as importantly, advance his three-body technique. Don't worry too much about the physical drills, his instructor had assured him. With the groundwork left by your predecessor, you'll pick it up fast. Once you get the basics down, you can move on to more advanced jutsu. In 3 days, after the weekly exam, Nathan planned to begin studying the substitution and transformation techniques. The three-body technique might not be powerful enough to overwhelm higher-level shinobi, but it could still hold its own against opponents of equal rank. If he wanted any measure of confidence before graduation, he'd have to push that skill to level 2 or even level 3. With that goal in mind, Nathan hurried home. He wolfed down a quick meal, then settled into his training space. First, he spent 2 hours refining his chakra until his reserves were completely replenished. When his body hummed with energy, he launched into the clone technique, repeating the movements until his chakra was spent. Finally, he closed the session with another 2-hour round of the chakra refinement exercise, determined to strengthen every aspect of his ninja arts before the next exam. After restoring about 100 chakra points, Nathan dove right back into practicing the clone technique. 2 full cycles later, night had fallen, and his body was running on fumes. Only then did he let himself rest. When he woke up, it was a brand new day. School, training, repeat. A week slipped by in that steady rhythm. That evening, Nathan was just stepping inside his home when a sudden knock echoed through the hall. Knock, knock, knock. Startled, he paused. Since arriving in Konoha, only his classmates and instructors had reached out to him. No one else even knew he existed. Who could it be? Shaking off the question, he moved to open the door. After all, he thought, this was the heart of Konoha, and the Uchiha name commanded respect. Troublemakers steered clear of the clan, and the only rowdy kids were either too young or out of the village. He had nothing to fear. Creak. The door swung open to reveal an Uchiha Shinobi in a Jonin uniform. The man looked him up and down, then said, "Nathan?" "Yeah." Nathan blinked, uncertain. "It's me. Who are you?" "I'm Uchiha Jito," the man replied with a polite bow. "I've come from the village to deliver your stipend." At those words, something in Nathan's expression shifted. He set aside thoughts of his former life and allowed a thin veil of melancholy to cross his features, just enough to convince any onlooker. Jito seemed satisfied. He leaned forward and added, "Your clan has also arranged a monthly allowance of 10,000 taels until you attain the rank of genin." With that, Jito extended a thick envelope toward Nathan. "Thank you," Nathan said earnestly, bowing his head as he accepted the packet. Creak. The door swung shut behind him, and the sorrow that had clouded Nathan's features vanished as quickly as it had appeared. He'd inherited memories from his past life, but he felt little genuine attachment to parents he'd never actually known. Still, in order to claim the pension they'd earned, he resolved to visit their graves once a year with fresh flowers, provided, of course, that he lived long enough to make the trip. Nathan broke the seal on the envelope and poured out the contents. Exactly 1.01 million taels. "Not bad. No one's been skimming off the top," he muttered with relief. Each of his parents had held the rank of chunin and, having fallen in battle, was owed a 500,000 tael pension. On top of that, the clan supplied him with 10,000 taels for living expenses. No more, no less. 1,000,000 taels might sound like a fortune, but Nathan knew how quickly the numbers could dwindle once the real costs of life set in. And if the clan could even lose track of these funds, he thought, what did that say about their cohesion? He tucked the coins away, steeling himself for whatever came next. In Konoha, the going rates for missions break down like this. D-rank missions pay between 5,000 and 50,000 taels. C-rank missions pay 30,000 to 100,000 taels. B-rank missions pay 80,000 to 200,000 taels. A-rank missions range from 150,000 to 1,000,000 taels. S-rank missions start at 1,000,000 taels and climb even higher. Chunin are cleared to accept C and B-rank jobs. Jonin handle B and A-rank assignments. Between official village contracts and splitting the hall with teammates, it's not hard for a skilled shinobi to earn 1,000,000 taels, provided you have the time and the partners to share. Contrast that with daily living costs. A simple bowl of ramen in Konoha runs about 60 taels. 3 meals a day add up to 5,400 taels each month, and that's only for food. For any shinobi serious about improving their skills, training expenses, special scrolls, practice weapons, stamina tonics quickly eclipse bare-bones living costs. With only 10,000 in reserve, you can barely afford your meals, let alone the gear and supplements you need to get stronger. Nathan had spent the last week eking out what little strength he could, training under those constraints. But now, everything had changed. With a sudden windfall of 1,000,000 taels, he could finally stock up on the rare herbal elixirs and secret medicines that would speed his progress through the ranks. Clutching the coin purse at his side, Nathan stepped out of his modest quarters and made his way directly to the Nara family's apothecary. Today, at last, he could invest in his future. In Konoha, the Nara clan's medical breakthroughs are unmatched. Their remedies set the standard for quality. After a morning spent browsing the shops, Nathan realized that the single most valuable purchase he could make was a supply of Bingliang pills. These compact rations, each capable of replacing a full meal, contain every nutrient a ninja needs on a mission. Some rare formulations even grant a temporary chakra boost, But Nathan only cared about the basic variety, the kind that counted as a complete dinner. With these pills on hand, he could extend each session of his chakra refinement technique without stopping to eat. The extra reserves of energy would then feed directly into his training in the three-body technique. By alternating between the two practices, he aimed to create a feedback loop, sharpening both skills more quickly than he ever could through conventional training. Without hesitation, Nathan slid a hefty pouch of coins across the counter. The clerk shot him a curious look as he scooped up the pills, clearly unused to customers stocking up on so many rations at once. But Nathan didn't mind attracting attention. In his mind, every pill represented another hour, or even half a day, of uninterrupted practice, bringing him one step closer to mastering the techniques he'd devoted his life to perfecting. Nathan decided to lie low and skip dinner engagements for a while. If anyone asked, they'd just assume he'd been training so hard he'd swapped real meals for the ration pills. Back home, he activated his status panel. A pale blue interface appeared before him. Name, Uchiha Nathan, age 10. Physique, 5 Spirit 7. Chakra, 159, up from 131. Bloodline, Sharingan, unawakened, 5100. Skills, Chakra Refinement Technique, 0, 5308. Clone Technique, Level 1, 246. Transformation Technique, Level 0. Substitution Technique, Level 0. Basic Taijutsu. Basic Taijutsu, 135. Ninja Tool Throwing, VOF 2, 10500, 29. Over the past week, Nathan had devoted 4 hours each night to practicing chakra refinement. Most nights he earned only 6 proficiency points, and on rare occasions, a few more. After 7 consecutive sessions, he'd amassed 45 points, boosting his refinement skill from 8 to 53 out of 100, exactly halfway to the next level. In the process, his total chakra capacity climbed by 28 points, from 131 to 159. Nathan allowed himself a small, hopeful smile. Progress had been slow, but it was progress. He was convinced that if he kept at it, he would one day master the ranks of Chijinla, or perhaps even Chitanla. Every morning, he devoted the 200 chakra points restored by his daily chakra refining technique entirely to refining his ninjutsu. 2 days ago, he had pushed his clone technique to level 1, finally breaking through its initial threshold and succeeding in splitting off an illusory double. As planned, he'd used that skill to breeze past the weekly assessment with no one the wiser. Yet once the clone technique hit level 1, each further practice yielded only a fraction of a proficiency point, exactly the same bottleneck he'd encountered with ninja tool throwing. Nathan knew this plateau was all that remained of his predecessor's groundwork. From here on out, every bit of advancement would fall on him alone. Undeterred, he shifted his focus to the transformation technique and the substitute technique. Thanks to the hints and residual memories left behind by the last practitioner, Nathan discovered he could train these two jutsus just as quickly as he once had the clone technique before its breakthrough. Now, each dedicated session earned him 2 or 3 proficiency points, an encouraging rate that fueled his determination to continue climbing higher. In just 5 days, Nathan had pushed his mastery of the transformation technique and the substitution technique up to level 0, 77,100, and level 0, 71,100. At that rate, he'd hit full proficiency in both in another 2 or 3 days, almost draining the entire legacy passed down to him. Over the past week, Sugemu Yeteng had arranged 3 more sparring matches. Nathan seized each chance, fully mastering his basic physical skills and even nudging them to level 1, 16,200. Beyond that, however, only steady, disciplined training would carry him forward. His fastest progressing ability remained ninja tool throwing, now sitting at level 2, 10,500. At this stage, he could land a perfect shot on a fixed target 10 meters away every single time, performance rivaling ninjas 2 or 3 years out of the academy. Still, he knew the technique had limits. Unless he awakened the Sharingan, he doubted he could raise it beyond level 3. Nathan stood 15 meters from the training target, every fiber of his concentration locked on the bullseye. Unless he hit dead center, his shuriken-throwing proficiency wouldn't advance. He still needed 500 more points to rise from level 2 to level 3, a rank that would put him on par with an average mid to upper tier shinobi. And without the Sharingan's enhancement of his tools and reflexes, this style of combat was essentially non-lethal, useful only for ambushes, sieges, or picking off foes far weaker than himself. But the Sharingan, he reminded himself. Nathan flicked his gaze to the floating progress bar in his field of vision. 51 of 100. For the past week, he'd tested every method he could imagine to awaken the Sharingan, yet the meter refused to budge. Still, he wouldn't give up. If the system could display his current percentage, it meant there was a way forward. He just hadn't uncovered the key to unlocking it yet. Chapter 7. News. Nathan closed the interface panel and rubbed his tired eyes. Reaching into his pack, he pulled out a soldier's ration pill and popped it into his mouth. With a decisive snap of his teeth, the pill cracked. Instant bitterness flooded his tongue, and he winced. "No wonder nobody wants to eat these," he muttered, forcing himself to swallow the unpleasant crumbs. A warm current blossomed in his stomach and quickly flowed through his limbs. Wasting no time, Nathan settled into a cross-legged posture and activated the chakra refinement technique. He inhaled deeply, directing the pill's medicinal energy inward. Over 2 concentrated hours, his chakra reserves were methodically healed and replenished until he felt every channel pulse with renewed power. He exhaled, ending the refinement cycle, and shifted to his next exercise, the transformation technique. Carefully guiding chakra through his meridians, he reshaped his facial features, his voice, even his posture. What began as subtle tweaks soon allowed him to assume entirely different appearances at will. The method proved surprisingly intuitive once his energy flow was steady. With transformation under his belt, Nathan turned to the substitution technique. Unlike the previous skill, this one required an external focus, traditionally a wooden plank or similar object, to take his place in mid-move. He patted the floor around him, but found only bare wood and stone. Without the proper prop, he couldn't complete the exercise. Rising to his feet, Nathan dusted off his pants and took a steadying breath. Today's session had revealed both progress and limits. He might lack the materials for substitution now, but next time he would come prepared. Every step forward counted, and Nathan was determined to master them all. Unlike spatial jutsu, the so-called substitute technique is nothing more than an elaborate sleight of hand. At the precise instant your opponent's attack lands, you trade places with a prepared decoy, an object or figure you've readied in advance, tricking the enemy into striking the fake. In that split second of confusion, you're free to counterattack or make your escape. Pulling it off demands flawless timing. When executed perfectly, it looks like magic, but a single misstep can leave you glaringly exposed. Novice shinobi, Jinin and Chunin alike, might get away with the occasional slip, but at the Junin level, everyone knows to watch for that telltale flicker. Any hint of the swap is enough for a seasoned opponent to pounce. That's why high-ranked shinobi rarely bother with the technique in serious duels. For Nathan, though, mastery of the substitute technique is a life-saving skill. He's still a long way from Junin status, so he can't afford to dismiss it. Despite how finicky and frustrating the drills can be, he tackles them with patience rather than impatience, knowing each imperfection he irons out brings him one step closer to safety and one step closer to victory. Nathan pressed his forehead against his palm as the last remnants of chakra flickered out. Over 10 minutes of intense focus had drained him completely. He reached for another soldier's rations, one of those grain pills, and swallowed it in one gulp before closing his eyes to begin the painstaking process of refining his chakra. 2 hours later, a steady tide of energy coursed through him again. He opened his eyes, squared his shoulders, and resumed his drills on the transformation technique and the replacement technique. Night deepened into quiet stillness, with only the rustle of leaves and the distant creak of wooden barracks to keep him company. Nathan cycled through the exercises again and again, determined to push his limits. At last, as dawn's first pale light crept across the sky, Nathan finished his final round of practice. It had been a longer session than usual. 2 extra hours of chakra refining had raised his chakra limit by 2 points and improved his overall mastery by 3 points. On top of that, the 100 additional chakra points he'd recovered granted him, more than 10 points of proficiency in both his transformation and replacement techniques. Nathan allowed himself a tired smile. These might seem like small gains, but accumulated day after day, they would add up impressively over weeks and months, maybe even a year. He knew full well, though, how grueling these sessions were and how many grain pills he'd already swallowed. One more, and his stomach would revolt. He leaned back against a tree, letting the dawn breeze cool his skin. Maybe tonight he'd rest a little earlier, but tomorrow he'd be back in formation, ready to push himself even harder. Between battlefield demands and the relentless drive to improve, Nathan had no intention of slowing down. Chapter 1. A Silent Watcher. Nathan stretched and yawned, then splashed cool water on his face before slipping back into his small bedroom. His cat Mizu responded with a soft purr, curling lazily on the windowsill. Morning light filtered through thin curtains, and minutes drifted by in serene quiet. Just as Nathan settled, something outside caught his eye. Perched atop the telephone pole directly beyond his window was a lone figure. Two crimson eyes set with 3 magatama each, Sharingan eyes, stared intently at him. Heart skipping a beat, Nathan leaned forward, but before he could focus on any other detail, the watcher slipped into shadow and vanished. Deep within the Uchiha compound stood the stately mansion of the clan's venerable elder. A gentle knock sounded at the door. "Come in," the elder's voice called. Uchiha Haruto entered with measured steps and bowed low before the old man seated at a carved wooden desk. "Great Elder." The elder's gaze lifted from a scroll. His eyes shone with curiosity. "Ah, Haruto, you said this was about our protege?" Haruto straightened and spoke with calm precision. "Yes, Great Elder, I have concluded my surveillance of Nathan as ordered." The elder tapped a wrinkled finger on the desk, his expression unreadable. "And what have you discovered?" "Have you managed to awaken your Sharingan?" "No, Sensei," Uchiha Haruto replied, shaking his head. "I've observed him closely these past few days, but there's been no sudden surge in his chakra, and his mental state remains steady. It's safe to say he doesn't have the makings of a Sharingan." The elderly clan elder let out a soft sigh. Though he had anticipated this outcome, it still stung. "Is that so?" he murmured. Usually, when a Uchiha of true potential endures trauma as severe as losing a parent, the Sharingan bursts forth immediately. Even if the awakening isn't instant, the body and mind exhibit telltale changes. Just a little stimulus, and the eyes should respond. He paused, recalling the day Nathan had learned of his parents' sacrifice. The young man had shown no sign of awakening, nor had his chakra or demeanor shifted in the following days. In that silence lay the verdict. Nathan lacked the bloodline quality required to wield the Sharingan. "Great Elder, shall we continue the observation?" Uchiha Haruto asked when the old man fell silent. The elder waved a hand. "That will be all for now. You may go." Haruto bowed respectfully. "Yes, Great Elder," and stepped out of the chamber. As the door clicked shut, Nathan remained seated, unaware that he had just lost his final chance to earn the clan's favor. If he'd succeeded in triggering the Sharingan under the elder's gaze, he would have been hailed as a prodigy, granted special privileges, and even a personal bodyguard as soon as he reached the Genin rank. The Uchiha were notoriously insular, but fiercely loyal among themselves. Well, except for one brat who always caused trouble. Still, Nathan refused to cling to hope. The crimson rings had not appeared in his eyes. He was no newborn genius today, and so he would not receive preferential treatment. It stung, but he didn't mind. His true strength came not from clan status, but from his relentless training and the cutting-edge proficiency panels he used to push himself further. 5 days later, the academy day was drawing to a close. A knock sounded on the teacher's desk, sharp enough to turn every head. "Students, gather around," called instructor Shan Muyiteng. "Teacher, what's the matter?" A chorus of voices replied as they formed a semicircle around him. Nathan lingered at the edge of the courtyard as the final bell rang. Over 30 of his classmates surged toward Shan Muyiteng, their voices rising in a cacophony of excitement. "School's almost out," someone shouted. "Yeah, let's go," another echoed. But their cheers died when Shan climbed onto a low stone wall, his face unusually grave. Nathan's pulse quickened. He sensed this wasn't the usual end-of-day announcement. "Quiet," Shan's voice cut through the clamor like a kunai through the air. Slowly, the students fell silent, all eyes fixed on him. Shan folded his arms and took a deep breath. Hear this, everyone. The village has decided to turn our midterm evaluation in 2 weeks into a full graduation exam. Those who pass will be awarded the rank of Jinin and officially join the ranks of Konoha's ninja. A stunned hush followed his words. Then, as if released from a seal, the students erupted into cheers and shouts of excitement. Banners of hope and ambition fluttered through their ranks. Nathan, however, stood motionless. He had expected an announcement of this magnitude, yet now that the moment was here, his chest tightened with an unfamiliar urgency. This was no mere school test. It was the threshold that would separate dreams from reality, and Nathan knew he couldn't afford to fail. "Teacher Sugi, is that true?" a student called, eyes wide with excitement. "Sensei, can we really qualify as ninjas before graduation?" Another piped up, equally eager. Nathan, formerly known as Qing Ming, listened to their innocent questions and quietly shook his head. These young recruits were still so sheltered, completely unaware of how perilous the ninja's path could be, especially in these troubled times. If he could choose, Nathan would stay at the academy for the rest of his life. But he knew that wasn't an option. Now, all he could do was hope they wouldn't be sent straight into battle the moment they received their certificates. Chapter 8, The Art of Reflecting the Heart. Panel. As soon as Nathan stepped through his front door, he activated his personal status screen. Soft blue light filled the room, revealing his latest stats. Name, Uchiha Nathan, age 10, physique 5, spirit 7, chakra 189, up from 159, Sharingan, unawakened, 5100, skills, chakra refining technique, level 0, 53 E8 100, clone technique, level 1, 2200, 2200, transformation technique, level 0, level 1, 77 100, 19 200, substitution technique, level 0, level 1, 71 100, 18 200, basic physical technique, level 1, 16 200, 65 200, ninja tool throwing, level 2, 10 500, 42 500. Nathan let out a small, satisfied grin. In just 5 days, his chakra reserves had grown by 30 points, now at 189. While that number might not impress a prodigy, for a 10-year-old it was nothing short of remarkable. After all, a shinobi's golden growth window stretches from ages 12 to 16. Before then, only true geniuses pull ahead. Yet here he was, already outpacing most of his peers. Deep down, Nathan knew the gap was widening, not by miracles, but by tireless effort and a steadfast heart. And as the glow of his panel faded, he felt more determined than ever to master the Sharingan and reflect the true strength of his spirit. Frankly, if you judged Nathan by chakra reserves alone, he'd barely qualify as average. But when you factor in his rank 1 clone technique, transformation technique, substitute technique, and basic physical training, plus his rank 2 proficiency in ninja tool throwing, he truly earns his stripes. Placed among last year's 6-year graduates, he'd still land solidly in the upper middle tier. And with 2 weeks left before the graduation exams, he has more than enough time to tighten up his skills. By then, he'd be ready for the battlefield. Wait, that still feels a bit risky. Nathan tapped through his status panel and realized he'd overlooked one vital detail. His chakra refining technique was resting at level 0 with 98 out of 100 points, just 2 points shy of entry level. The moment he hit entry, his passive chakra recovery would jump dramatically, leaving him with plenty of surplus energy to learn a higher grade ninjutsu. And as for where he'd find that ninjutsu? No problem. His predecessor's parents had left several scrolls hidden away in their study. With those in hand, he'd be unstoppable. Nathan glanced at his proficiency panel. Once he hit mastery level 1 in the chakra refining technique, he'd be able to learn its first true form, so long as its elemental alignment didn't conflict with his own. Thanks to the panel's guidance, all he needed was time and focus. Pulling a soldier's pill from his inner storage, he popped it into his mouth and activated the technique. He let the herbal compound course through his system, then settled into a meditative stance. 1 minute, 2, 5, 10. Before he realized it, 2 hours had slipped by in silence. Abruptly, Nathan's eyelids snapped open. A spark of clarity danced in his irises as a cascade of insights flooded his mind. He finally understood the true leap from level 0 to level 1 in the refining technique. Where level 0 merely awakened latent potential, an efficiency value of 1, level 1 doubled that rate. In practical terms, he could now draw twice as much chakra from his reserves in the same span of time. This upgrade affected not only his chakra recovery speed, but also raised his absolute chakra ceiling. With his revelation solidifying, Nathan closed his eyes once more. He resumed the chakra refining technique, weaving in his newfound understanding and pushing past his old limits. Half an hour later, Nathan's eyelids fluttered open. With a simple thought, he summoned his proficiency panel. Proficiency panel name, Uchiha Nathan age 10, Constitution 5 Spirit 7, Chakra 171-192, max increased from 189 to 192, Bloodline, Sharingan unawakened 51-100. Skills, Chakra Extraction level 1, 100. Duplicate Technique level 1, 2200. Transformation Technique level 1, 19200. Substitution Technique level 1, 18200. Basic Physical Technique level 1, 65200. Ninja Tool Throwing level 2, 42500. Just as he'd hoped, the newly promoted level 1 chakra extraction had yielded in 30 minutes exactly what the level 0 version had taken an entire hour to accomplish, a restoration of 50 chakra points and a 1-point increase in his chakra capacity. The only drawback was that raising the skill from level 1 to level 2 would still require a full hour of continuous use. He wouldn't gain any extra proficiency this time. Without progress in his predecessor's chakra refining technique, still sitting stubbornly at level 0, there simply was no additional bonus. Nathan let out a satisfied breath. Even so, this half-hour boost was a huge leap forward. He closed the panel, ready to press on with his training. Nathan knew that after today, the amount of chakra he could use each day would double. Of course, that power wouldn't come for free. He'd need to take more cooling pills to replenish himself, but he'd stocked up plenty. A few bouts of stomachache was a small price to pay to survive on the battlefield. Shaking off those practical concerns, Nathan rose and left his room, heading straight for the study his late parents had once used. Until now, he'd been either at classes or training at home, and had never found time to sort through their relics. He'd peeked at the scroll-laden shelves, but never lingered. Today, he intended to change that. "Let's see what's here," he whispered, settling at the old wooden desk. He reached for the topmost scroll, untying its silk cord and unrolling the parchment. The title glowed in neat black ink. Uchiha Clan Secret Technique, Fire Style, Great Fireball Technique. Nathan's eyes widened. The text described a massive sphere of flame expelled from the user's mouth, capable of both intense combustion and explosive force. Its strength depended entirely on how much chakra was invested. Finally, he'd found a jutsu worthy of deep study, and with a steady breath, he began to memorize every stroke of the kanji. Nathan sat cross-legged in the dim glow of the scroll-filled alcove, studying the open parchment in his hands. It detailed the fire style, Great Fireball Technique, a solid, practical ninjutsu ranked C, simple enough for a low-level shinobi to learn and keep in reserve as a trump card. Yet he hesitated before deciding. He slid that scroll aside and opened two more. Both recorded advanced fire techniques, the Fire Style Phoenix Fire Technique and the Fire Style Dragon Fire Technique. Though they, too, were C rank, their requirements were steeper than the Great Fireball. The Dragon Fire Technique called for finer chakra control, and the Phoenix Fire Technique explicitly demanded mastery of the Great Fireball as its foundation. Without that base skill, learning Phoenix Fire would be nearly impossible. Nathan set those aside, then examined two other scrolls, each promising a powerful illusion. The first was titled Magical Illusion, Iron Shackles. To cast it, the user must wield the Sharingan. Once activated, it forges a spiritual realm of iron nails that drive through an opponent's body, inflicting excruciating pain and leaving them paralyzed. Clearly, Nathan's ancestors had stored it away, hoping their heir would awaken the Sharingan. Unfortunately, Nathan had no such gift, not yet. He glanced at the second illusion scroll with equal curiosity. Though its markings were faint, it seemed to describe another genjutsu of subtle tricks and deceptions. Its exact effect was harder to discern, but its aura hinted at something less brutal, perhaps a perfect foil for the more violent iron shackles. Nathan carefully resealed it and tucked it back among the others. There was much to learn, and he would need every advantage he could muster. Nathan stared in wonder at the scroll's strange illusion. He was familiar with the magical illusion, art of chains, but he'd never heard of the so-called art of heart R, afflection. Carefully, he unrolled the second parchment and began to study its contents. As he read, his expression shifted from indifference to surprise, then to uncertainty, and finally to anxious anticipation. When he reached the end, relief flooded his features, and with good reason. This heart reflection technique might be exactly what he needed to break through the stagnation in his Sharingan's awakening. Chapter 9. Half a month later. Nathan had been poring over the dusty scroll for days when he finally grasped the true nature of the heart-reflecting technique. On paper, it was described as nothing more than an advanced visual illusion. By projecting one's own emotions and thoughts through the eyes as spiritual energy, the caster unsettles the target's senses and warps their judgment. To an untrained eye, it appeared deceptively simple. Just another C-rank jutsu. But the reality was far stranger. The scroll rated its learning difficulty as A rank, yet its apparent effects were weaker than many mid-tier illusions. Why, then, had someone devoted so much time and effort to record and preserve this technique? Nathan knew the answer before he even stumbled across the answer in the margin notes. The legendary Uchiha clan. Hidden among the scroll's annotations was a single line, almost scrawled in urgency. Use this to awaken the Sharingan. In the Shinobi world, few families believed in miracles, and fewer still had the foresight to invest in an illusion that seemed underpowered. Yet the Uchiha, ever visionaries, had recognized that a jutsu capable of transmitting pure emotion to another soul might trigger the latent ocular power they guarded so jealously. So Nathan practiced each movement with painstaking care, determined to master the heart-reflecting technique. After all, if this scroll really held the secret to Sasuke Uchiha's famed dojutsu, then even the smallest breakthrough could reshape his destiny, and perhaps the destiny of an entire clan. Long ago, a few perceptive members of the Uchiha clan began to question the Sharingan's drawbacks. Its activation is agonizingly difficult, and once awakened, it can easily spiral out of control. They asked themselves whether there might be a gentler, more reliable method, one that would not only strengthen the clan's abilities, but also preserve its internal harmony. Their thoughts turned to the Hyuga clan's Byakugan. Of the three great dojutsu, the Byakugan is renowned for how softly it unfolds. Even those born with only a partial Hyuga bloodline can, through dedicated training, fully awaken this eye technique well into adulthood. The Sharingan offers no such luxury. It demands overwhelming emotional trauma to manifest, and once a shinobi reaches maturity, his fundamental mindset is largely set. Without a shattering life event, the Sharingan simply will not appear. Inspired by the Hyuga approach, these Uchiha pioneers resolved to adapt its training methods. If they could devise a step-by-step cultivation routine, one that mirrors the Byakugan's gradual opening, they believed they could achieve a controlled, stable awakening of the Sharingan for future generations. Nathan had conceived the heart-reflecting technique under such desperate circumstances. Its core idea was simple, yet ambitious. Replicate the exact chakra fluctuations and mental surges that occur when the Sharingan activates its hypnotic power, then feed those signals back into the brain's neurons, optic nerves, body cells, and spirit. In doing so, the technique would lay the perfect physiological groundwork for the Sharingan to awaken, as if cultivating a fertile bed, then allowing the Uchiha bloodline's power to blossom within it. On paper, the approach held promise, and in practice, it proved that it really could give aspiring Uchiha a much-needed first nudge toward their first Tomei. Yet its overall effectiveness was painfully low. Scrolls recording the clan's experiments show that several members attempted the heart-reflecting technique, but none succeeded in fully awakening their eyes. Were it not for the inventor's unwavering conviction and the testimonies of a handful of shinobi who had already unlocked their Sharingan, and who confirmed that the method did accelerate the eye's development, most people would have dismissed the heart-reflecting technique as little more than folklore. The reflection of the heart technique has always been a forgotten footnote in Uchiha history, fiendishly difficult to master, its benefits nearly imperceptible. Those who've already awakened the Sharingan have no use for it, and those who haven't find that, despite their best efforts, it yields no obvious results. It's no wonder the clan at large has effectively written it off. Only a handful of proud Uchiha, those unwilling to accept mediocrity, still devote themselves to its practice. The rest have never even heard of it. So it isn't surprising that Nathan had never encountered the technique before now. In his previous life, his parents had painstakingly collected every scrap of information on this lost art, driven by that same refusal to settle for ordinary power. Tragically, they died on the battlefield before they could complete their training. Nathan, however, carries their legacy and their hope. Thanks to his inherited knowledge and an extraordinary new tool known simply as the proficiency panel, he is determined to succeed where so many others have failed. The proficiency panel charts every nuance of his progress, every flicker of chakra control, every microscopic refinement of vision within his mind's eye. No breakthrough will go unnoticed. No error will go uncorrected. Armed with this advantage, Nathan is poised to become the first Uchiha in history to awaken the Sharingan through the reflection of the heart technique. Others have faltered under the technique's cruel demands or simply lacked the patience to push through its countless plateaus. But Nathan has something they never had, a way to see and to feel his own evolution at every step. He will not be ordinary. He cannot fail. And as the dark hours of training stretch on, a new legend is quietly beginning to take shape. Nathan refused to let go of the plan. As long as its authenticity and effectiveness held up, it would be the key to his rise. He drew in a deep, steadying breath, then gathered the two scrolls, the fire style, great fireball technique, and the mind reflection technique, and left the study. Over the next fortnight, he would devote half his chakra to these jutsu, not merely to get started, but to truly familiarize himself with their forms and applications. The village still hummed with activity, a sure sign the front lines hadn't completely collapsed. It was unlikely they'd be sent into battle right away, which meant he had a valuable window of time. During this buffer, he intended to perfect the great fireball technique as his ace in the hole and rigorously test the mind reflection technique. If fortune favored him, he might even awaken the Sharingan, granting him a significant edge in self-defense once the fighting began. That very night, Nathan dove into training. In the blink of an eye, 2 weeks slipped by. It was now the end of September. With only 1 week left until the Genin graduation exam, Nathan knew he couldn't afford any distractions. After studying the exam requirements, he applied for, and was quickly granted, a full week of leave to concentrate entirely on training. Normally such an extended absence would be hard to arrange, but instructor Shanmu Yiteng trusted Nathan's dedication and let him go. At home, Nathan settled onto his tatami mat and summoned his personal status panel. Name, Uchiha Nathan, age 10, physique 5, spirit 7, chakra attribute 16, stat increased from 192 to 72, bloodline, Sharingan, unawakened, 5100, skills, chakra refining technique, Livport 1, progress, 91-200, clone technique, Livport 1, progress 95-200, transformation technique, Livport 1, 94-200, substitution technique, Livport 1, progress 93-200, fire style, great fireball technique, Livport 0, progress 3100, reflection of the heart technique, Livport 0, progress 3100, basic physical technique, progress 185-200s, ninja tool throwing, Livport 2, progress 12500. For the past 2 weeks, Nathan had spent 6 hours every night practicing the chakra refining technique. Staring at the panel, he allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. His late-night efforts had more than doubled his chakra reserves, giving him the edge he'd need in the day's smiling. Oh come. Thanks to the potent effect of level 1 of the chakra refinement technique, Nathan's chakra capacity has been increasing by 12 points every day. In just half a month, he's added 180 points, raising his total from 192 to 372. Since a single 3-body jutsu consumes about 20 chakra points, he can now unleash it 18 or 19 times in succession. That's the kind of endurance you'd expect from a typical genin. In other words, Aside from actual combat experience, Nathan's raw power already rivals many higher-ranking genin. Still, as he pushes his reserves higher, Nathan can't shake the feeling that he's bumping into a more fundamental limit, one that the chakra refinement technique can't overcome. The technique accelerates how quickly he taps into his potential, but it doesn't expand the physical boundaries of his body. Imagine his body as a wooden barrel and the refinement technique as a ladle. You can scoop water faster or slower, but no matter how efficient your ladle is, the barrel itself can only hold so much. Right now, Nathan's barrel is still far from full. Physical strength is only at 5, and stamina sits at 7. Clearly, he still has room to grow. Nathan's body still had its limits. Once his chakra reached a certain level, it would hit a plateau, and without raising his physical ceiling, even mastering the chakra refining technique to its fullest wouldn't push him any further. Fortunately, with each passing day he devoted to the basic physical technique, he could sense his endurance and strength improving. Bit by bit, his physical threshold climbed higher, clearing the way for greater chakra refinement. Chapter 10. Training Sprint. Over the past 2 weeks, Master Shanmu Yiteng had deliberately intensified the students' regimen to prepare them for the looming conflict. As a result, Nathan's basic physical skill skyrocketed from level 1, 65, 200 points, to level 1, 185, 200, just 15 points shy of a full promotion. He planned to push it over the threshold at dawn tomorrow. During the same period, each of his 3 body techniques gained 75 proficiency points, placing them nearly halfway to level 2. With the graduation exam fast approaching, Nathan knew he couldn't achieve this progress on the Academy's limited practice schedule. That's why he'd taken leave, securing every waking hour for training without the interruptions of classes. In addition to fortifying his physique and mastering those body techniques, Nathan devoted himself to 2 advanced skills: the fire style, great fireball technique, and the heart reflection technique. Every morning, he honed the swirling orb of flame until it glowed like a miniature sun. Every evening, he refined the subtle, mirrored energy flow of his defensive art. By compartmentalizing his days, stamina sprints at dawn, strength and form drills by midday, elemental practice in the afternoon, and meditative refinement at dusk, Nathan maximized every minute of his leave. Tomorrow, he vowed, those final 15 points would drive basic physical skill to level 2, and bring him one step closer to passing the graduation exam and meeting whatever trials the war might throw at him. Nathan had spent the last 2 weeks wrestling with 2 advanced techniques, one C-rank ninjutsu and one A-rank illusion, whose difficulty dwarfed even the E-rank 3-body technique. Using his proficiency panel, he'd only managed to unlock a little under a third of each skill in that time. Only fire style, great fireball technique, and the heart mirror technique could regulate his chakra output on their own. Without those 2, he was convinced he wouldn't have broken 30 proficiency points. And yet, the heart mirror hadn't yielded the breakthrough he'd hoped for, and his Sharingan progress remained stubbornly frozen at 51 out of 100. Nathan suspected the eye's true power would only awaken once he'd reached some hidden threshold, but when that might happen was anyone's guess. Fortunately, Nathan wasn't in a rush. He reviewed his modest gains from the past fortnight, then casually produced a soldier's grain pill from his sash. With a sharp snap of his teeth, he crushed it between his molars, swallowed, and plunged back into his drills. Hours slipped by in the flicker of chakra, and before he knew it, night had fallen. Dawn broke the next morning over the Uchiha clan's training grounds. The camp lay eerily quiet. The war had thinned the ranks, and few remained to witness the pale sun rising over the scarred fields. Nathan stood alone amid the dew-wet grass, ready to resume his campaign against the limits of chakra and iris. Nathan stepped into the clearing, strapped weighted bandages around his forearms and ankles, and began his basic physical skills training. This discipline covered more than just combat techniques. It also included exercises to fortify his body and boost overall fitness. He knew he wouldn't gain proficiency as fast as by sparring with a real opponent, but with plenty of time ahead, steady progress was guaranteed. He approached a sturdy oak, and with a deep breath, unleashed a flurry of punches and kicks. Thud! Thud! Bark flew in flakes, exposing the pale wood beneath. When fatigue crept in, he paused, wiped the sweat from his brow, and switched to knee strikes and evasive footwork before returning to full-power blows. Watching the proficiency gauge inch forward kept him focused and banished any hint of boredom. By mid-morning, Nathan felt a jolt of energy surge through him. On his interface panel, the counter clicked past the final mark. Basic physical skills had advanced from level 1, 200, to level 2, 500. In that instant, a flash of insight illuminated his ind, granting him a deeper understanding of combat. Nathan's breakthrough in the basic physical skills triggered a profound chain reaction. A warming current rose from the depths of his marrow and surged through his body along every vessel and meridian. It was as though a great weight had been lifted from him. Pure comfort radiated through his limbs and sinews. He opened his status panel to check. Sure enough, his physical attribute had climbed from 5 to 6. Of course, this boost wasn't solely the work of the basic physical skills. That technique contributed at most a third of the gain. The rest sprang from the latent foundation Nathan had cultivated throughout his growth. The breakthrough had simply unlocked that dormant potential. In his world, a physique score of 5 was unremarkable, common among practitioners at his level. But a 6? That was the mark of a true prodigy. Attribute growth wasn't linear. Advancing from 5 to 6 didn't mean a mere 1-point jump. It translated to nearly 50% greater physical capacity, an astonishing leap that set him far ahead of his peers. Nathan felt a surge of satisfaction. By absorbing the soul of his predecessor, he'd secured a rare physical aptitude. His spiritual attribute now stood at 7 points. Such a gifted constitution was almost unheard of, and for the foreseeable future, he needn't worry about hitting any bodily limits. Having acclimated himself to this new power, Nathan wasted no time. He drew a soldier's ration pill from his pack, popped it into his mouth, and began to refine chakra. In no time, his basic physical technique advanced to level 2, precisely the milestone he'd been aiming for. Next on his list were the 3-body technique, the fire escape, great fireball technique, and the reflection of the heart technique. For over 3 hours, Nathan sat cross-legged, circulating spiritual energy until his chakra reserves brimmed once more. Rising to his feet, he moved through the crude but functional postures of the 3-body technique. At level 1, the form was little more than an introduction. Functional, yes, but riddled with flaws. He needed level 2 mastery so that in the heat of battle the routine would flow instinctively. Sweat beaded on his brow as he pushed himself. Gradually, his movements grew smoother, more precise, until finally his chakra reserves emptied. He collapsed onto the ground, panting, but a satisfied grin tugged at his lips. His proficiency in the 3-body technique had jumped by more than 10 points. Not one to rest for long, Nathan settled back into meditation and began refining chakra anew, determined to tackle his next set of techniques with the same relentless drive. Once Nathan's chakra was fully restored, he went right back to the tri-shadow technique, running through it 3 more times. Each repetition raised his proficiency by 15 points. With a bit of chakra still left, he switched gears to work on fire release, great fireball jutsu, then moved on to the genjutsu he called reflection of the heart. By the time he'd honed both ninjutsu and illusion to his satisfaction, the sky outside had turned pitch black. Exhausted but exhilarated, Nathan finally set his scroll aside and allowed himself to rest. Dawn would come all too soon, and he knew he'd repeat the same grueling routine. Most people would find it dull, even torturous, but he couldn't get enough of the steady rise in his skills. A week slipped by in this relentless cycle. Tonight, after completing his final training session of the stretch, he summoned his status panel once more, eager to see how far he'd come. The soft blue glow of the screen flickered to life, revealing Nathan's status panel. Name, Uchiha Nathan. Age 10 years old. Physical prowess 6, spirit 7, chakra 580 from 372. Bloodline sharing and unawakened 51-100 skills, chakra refining technique. Level 1 195-200 3-body clone technique. Level 2 1500 transformation technique. Level 2 1500 substitute technique. Level 2 1500 fire style great fireball technique. Level 0, 5200. Reflection technique. Level 0, 6100. Basic physical technique. Level 2, 100. Ninja tool throwing. Level 2, 120, 500. Nathan let a tired smile spread across his face. He'd finally broken through the bottleneck. Nearly 600 chakra points, a second level 3 body technique, and solid foundations in both physical combat and tool throwing. After crossing over into this world, he'd tiptoed through every mission, terrified that any misstep would expose him as an imposter. A full month had passed since then, and the worst was behind him. All that remained was to awaken his Sharingan before stepping onto the battlefield. Then, at last, he could claim a measure of safety. He realized that by training smartly, and even taking it easy at times, he could steadily grow stronger and easily survive the coming Ninja World War. What happened after that would depend entirely on how events played out. At his current rate of improvement, in just a few years he'd rank among the very top of the ninja world. By then, anyone who dared threaten him would be no match. Talk of an extermination catastrophe didn't faze him at all, and frankly, if someone ever crossed his path, he wouldn't hesitate to take them out first. With that settled in his mind, Nathan turned and walked back into his bedroom. Chapter 11, Graduation. The next morning, Nathan arrived at the Ninja Academy well before dawn. He settled into his seat just as the old headmaster, Hiruzen Sarutobi, began yet another of his interminable graduation speeches. When the final words at last faded away, Nathan rose and stepped into the exam hall. The Academy's graduation test wasn't limited to jutsu demonstrations. In the morning, every candidate faced a series of written papers: code breaking, map drawing, strategic theory, basic knowledge any shinobi worth their shuriken should have mastered after years of training. Compared with the notoriously brutal Chunin exams, this test was refreshingly straightforward. After 3 or 4 years in class, passing was little more than a formality. They even threw in one final question on the will of fire. Essentially, write us something nice about the village. Nathan hadn't penned a proper composition in over a decade, but flattering your elders was hardly beyond him. By midday, the bell rang. With no further exams scheduled for the afternoon, the students were free to stretch their legs. Nathan had no intention of spending the rest of the day in a stuffy classroom. He gathered his papers, shouldered his pack, and stepped out into the crisp spring air, ready to enjoy his first real taste of freedom since joining the academy. Nathan had just pushed his chakra refining technique to 195 out of 200 experience points, and with level up within sight, he couldn't afford to waste a moment. The moment he stepped through his door, he sank into his training stance and began refining his chakra. 6 hours later, after running through 2 full cycles of the technique, he felt the familiar jolt of advancement. Level 2, 1500. Even though he'd expected it, the surge of power still made his heart race. Upgrading from level 1 to level 2 had doubled the technique's efficiency in unlocking his body's potential. Now, every hour spent refining restored 200 chakra points and boosted his maximum chakra reserve by 4. His training would be markedly more productive, but Nathan knew there were hard limits to how far this advantage could carry him. The simple truth was that the human body can only absorb so much. He might have an ample supply of Bing Liang pills, but excess pills were pointless if his system couldn't process them. He wasn't an Uzumaki like Naruto, capable of swallowing them like candy. They were, after all, highly compressed nutrients, and overindulgence only led to painful indigestion. Nathan still remembered the sharp discomfort he'd felt only a week ago when he'd nearly reached his own absorption threshold. Despite these constraints, he couldn't afford to slow down. With his chakra refining technique now at level 2, every moment counted. He wiped the sweat from his brow, adjusted his stance, and prepared to push himself further, one refined breath of chakra at a time. Nathan knew that even if he poured every ounce of effort into training right now, he could only boost his efficiency to 1.5 times its current level. That didn't render the chakra refining technique useless. In fact, every increase mattered. At the very least, it would save him precious hours, and later, when he needed to drill other ninjutsu, he wouldn't have to scramble for time. The second day of exams dawned. Just as on day 1, there was no trial for the three-body technique. Instead, the morning was devoted to basic physical drills and the afternoon to ninja tool throwing. Since each student went one at a time, the pace was slower than usual. It was mid-afternoon before Nathan's name was called. Uchiha Nathan, 10 ring targets, perfect score. A murmur of astonishment rippled through the ranks. Still, Nathan's expression remained unreadable. He showed no hint of triumph. After all, with his current ninja tool throwing skill at level 2, 1 in 2,500, landing a perfect shot on a 10-meter target was far from easy. He had also earned flawless marks in the basic physical assessment. As he stepped off the field, instructors and classmates alike showed him impressed glances. Nathan merely nodded and stepped away, already focused on the challenges that lay ahead. As long as you reach level 100 out of 200 points, you earn full marks. Even if you score above level 0, 80 out of 100, you still pass. That alone speaks to how lenient this year's exams have been. Night had fallen over the village, and an uneasy hush settled in. This was day 3, the final and most critical test. The first 2 days had been important, but they wouldn't determine a student's fate entirely. Today was different. Anyone who failed today would be eliminated, regardless of stellar performance before. In the ninja world, strength ruled above all. No matter how deep one's theoretical knowledge, it counted for nothing without real power to back it up. As the saying went, big fists make the rules. If your fist wasn't strong enough, nobody would listen to you. For Shinobi, ninjutsu was that fist. If your ninjutsu was weak, what hope did you have? Yet the ninja world was never short on rule breakers and outliers. Take Metkai, for example. His talent for ninjutsu was virtually non-existent, but his taijutsu prowess was unmatched anywhere. He was a freak of nature, proof that common sense didn't always apply here. Nathan stood among his classmates in the training yard, the moonlight casting long shadows across the grounds. Every student was silent, muscles tensed, eyes flicking between the examiner's pavilion and the scrolls they held. The air was thick with anticipation. Nathan gripped his kunai belt and took a steadying breath. This was it, the moment that would define his future as a ninja. He could feel his heart pounding, each beat echoing in his ears. Failure was not an option. From the pavilion, an examiner finally spoke. Candidates who have already passed, step aside and wait for your results. The rest, prepare yourselves. Nathan's pulse quickened. He scanned the yard and noticed Metkai leaning casually against a training post, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Despite Metkai's reputation as a taijutsu prodigy, Nathan felt a strange sense of solidarity. Both of them depended on this final trial to prove their worth. The examiner unrolled a new scroll. Your mission tonight is to extract the hidden scroll from the center of the labyrinth we've constructed. You must rely on ninjutsu to navigate the traps and illusions we've placed within. Fail to reach it or fail to return, and you will be eliminated. Murmurs rippled through the students. A labyrinth filled with traps, illusions, and shadow clones designed to overwhelm even seasoned shinobi. Nathan swallowed hard, but kept his gaze steady on the scroll. This exam tests your mastery of ninjutsu, the examiner continued. It's the culmination of everything you've learned. If your strength falters, there is no second chance. Silence fell once more as the examiners stepped back. A single lantern was lit at the labyrinth's entrance, casting an eerie glow over the twisting passages. Nathan tightened his fists, feeling the weight of every expectation, his own and those of his village. He whispered to himself, "I won't fail." Then he stepped forward into the darkness, determined to prove that his fist was strong enough to shape his destiny. Most students clearly weren't qualified to make Konoha bend its rules. That's why today's assessment was so critical for anyone hoping to walk the ninja path. The tension in the classroom was thicker than it had been over the previous 2 days. Nathan leaned back in his seat, surprisingly calm, as he watched Sensei Shan Muyiteng call his classmates to the podium one by one to demonstrate the three-body technique. Having mastered level 2 himself, Nathan brimmed with confidence. "Ranagi Aoki, are you ready?" Shanmu's voice cut through the hush. "Yes, Sensei," Aoki answered softly, nodding. "All right," Shanmu continued, "choose one of the 3 body arts and perform it." This year's exam had an unusual twist. Instead of assigning a single technique, students could pick whichever of the three arts EI preferred. On the plus side, it allowed each shinobi candidate to showcase their strongest skill. On the downside, it opened the door to easy loopholes. Someone who'd only learned the body transformation art could simply use that, no need to attempt a risky clone or substitution maneuver, and still pass the assessment. In past assessments, any student assigned the shadow clone technique would inevitably fail. Shanmu Yiteng couldn't have overlooked so glaring a loophole unless he'd been ordered to do so. Paired with yesterday's unusually lenient grading, it's clear Konoha is quietly expanding its reserves. How many of these recruits will live through real combat, however, remains anyone's guess. Uchiha Nathan. The summons rang out from the front of the classroom. Nathan rose calmly and walked forward. "I'm ready," he said. "Begin when you're set." Nathan's fingers snapped into the hand seals, and in an instant 2 perfect shadows materialized at his flanks. 3 seconds flat, impressive. Shanmu Yitang noted, jotting the time onto his clipboard. "You may step down." "Thank you, Sensei." Nathan bowed courteously and returned to his seat. A hushed awe swept through his classmates. "Did you see that? Nathan's unbelievable," a girl whispered. Within moments, the classroom buzzed with excited chatter. None of it fazed Nathan. Once he'd returned to his seat, he immediately began to replay the art of reflecting the heart in his mind. Compared to ninjutsu, genjutsu is notoriously harder to master, and this particular illusion, modeled on the hypnotic power of the Sharingan, was even more intricate. Most genjutsu target others, so a miscast merely inconveniences the victim. But the reflecting heart technique chiefly affects the user. The sensory distortions you can impose on a foe are only a byproduct. Its true strength rivals that of a C-rank illusion. Had he not been guided by the proficiency panel, Nathan never would have dared attempt something so perilous. Yet after 2 full days of concentrated practice, his mastery rating had soared from level 0, 6100, to level 0, 9200. Unless something unexpected happens, tonight he'll finally launch his first full test, and only then will he know if this technique can actually trigger his Sharingan. Chapter 12. Hope. That night, Nathan stood alone in the training room, his focus unshakable. With practiced precision, he wove a complex series of hand seals. Instantly, chakra flooded his body, and for a brief moment, his eyes flared with a brilliant light. Across from him, inside the reinforced cage, the white rabbit he'd been observing slumped to the floor, unconscious. A notification blinked in the air before him. Proficiency +1. His reflection heart technique jumped from level 0, 99-100 to level 1 to 100. As the technique upgraded, Nathan felt a peculiar new chakra ignite in his mind. It coursed along his meridians and settled behind his eyes, tingling until every nerve seemed to pulse with energy. "What is this?" he murmured. The memory of Senju Tobirama's lesson on the Uchiha clan's ocular awakening flashed through his thoughts. He recalled how Uchiha members, born with an overwhelming capacity for love, would trigger a surge of special chakra in their brains if they ever lost that emotion. That chakra would reshape their optic nerves, and their eyes would open to a hidden power. Nathan's heart quickened. The sensation in his own head was identical to Tobirama's description. His newly acquired reflection heart technique must be doing something similar. Panel. With a single thought, he summoned his proficiency display. It hovered before him, clear and precise, mapping out every skill, every level. As he studied the readout, anticipation thrummed through his veins. This was only the beginning of a deeper transformation, one that might prove far more extraordinary than he'd ever imagined. Name, Uchiha, age 10, Physique, 6, Spirit 7, Chakra 415, 586 and 22, Bloodline, Sharingan Unawakened, 51-100 Skills, Chakra Refining Technique of 2, 9-500, Clone Technique Level 2, 100, Transformation Technique Level 2, 1-500, Substitution Technique Level 2, Fire Style, Great Fireball Technique, Eve of 0, 52-100, Reflection Technique, ELV 1, 1-100. Basic Physical Technique E2, Ninja Tool Throwing, ELV 2, 200. No change? Nathan stared at the Sharingan Awakening gauge stubbornly stuck at 51%. He froze, disbelief flitting across his young face. He'd counted on the Reflection Technique to advance his bloodline, yet nothing had happened. No, this can't be right. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and exhaled in a slow, steady rhythm. Letting his thoughts clear, he sank into renewed concentration. When his mind felt centered, he formed the seals once more and activated the reflection technique. Previously, Nathan needed a rabbit, some living target, to anchor the jutsu and guarantee its effect. Now, though, he could release the technique without any external focus. The power was entirely his to command. There was a catch. Upgrading reflection to level 1 meant each use now consumed at least 200 chakra. Nathan's pulse quickened at the thought of such a drain, but he refused to back down. If this was what it took to awaken his Sharingan, he'd give every last drop. Although the chakra cost of the triple body technique shifted slightly after entering the gate, it was still negligible compared to that of the reflection heart technique. Consider this. The triple body technique is a basic E-rank ninjutsu, requiring only about 20 chakra points per use. In contrast, the reflection heart technique is a formidable A-rank jutsu. Before accessing the gate, each session burned at least 100 chakra points, and now it's risen to 200. Only because Nathan's chakra reserves had swelled so dramatically could he even sustain this level of training. Shaking off those calculations, Nathan refocused on the subtle currents of the reflection heart technique. As before, a unique chakra signature blossomed at the center of his mind and streamed toward his eyes. He held his breath, waiting. After only a few heartbeats, he opened his eyes. On the display panel, the Sharingan's progress bar still hadn't budged, yet Nathan felt no frustration this time. The resonance in his vision told him everything he needed to know. His eyes were on the cusp of awakening the Sharingan. Nathan stared at the training interface. The heart-reflecting technique had indeed worked, but its impact on the Sharingan's awakening meter was barely perceptible. The indicator stubbornly remained at 51,100. He sighed inwardly. How many more uses of this jutsu would it take to push that number up by 1? Summoning his chakra, Nathan began the heart-reflecting technique again, over and over, hour after hour. With each casting, his mastery edged upward. Finally, when his proficiency in the technique hit level 1, 10,200, the Sharingan progress bar inched forward to 52,100. Relief washed over him. He'd expected the shift, but seeing the meter tick at last eased his mind. By his count, he'd burned through about 2,000 chakra in total. That was a hefty investment for a Genin, though no real burden for someone at Chunin level. Even if he couldn't rack up 10 proficiency points in a single session every time, Nathan reminded himself that progress, even in small increments, was still progress. Nathan frowned as he studied the progress panel. Even if someone insisted on performing the ritual every single day, it would still take months to awaken the Sharingan. So why hadn't a single Uchiha ever succeeded? If the process really required years of unrelenting effort, perhaps it made sense that no one had pulled it off. But in mere months? Surely someone among the Uchiha, renowned for their burning desire to unlock the Sharingan, would have achieved it by now. Nathan refused to underestimate their determination, and yet with this very method at their disposal, nobody had awakened the eye. The thought weighed heavily on him. He turned the problem over in his mind, but no matter how long he stared at the panel or replayed the technique in his head, he couldn't find a flaw. There was nothing more to do but push forward. The progress bar had already shifted. He simply needed to keep at it. Fortunately, he had a few days free from classes. He could use that time to master Fire Style, Great Fireball Technique, and more importantly, to observe how each trial affected the awakening gauge. By tracking the pattern of incremental growth, he'd be able to refine his training plan. All that, however, could wait until after he tested the fire jutsu. Nathan stifled a yawn and glanced at the clock. 5 in the morning already. He rubbed his eyes, steeling himself for the work ahead. Whether it took months or longer, he was determined to be the first. Nathan had stayed awake all night to test the reflection heart technique. Now, as dawn broke, he finally allowed himself to rest. The next day at noon, after grabbing a quick bite, Nathan made his way to the training grounds. He needed to build up enough chakra before practicing any jutsu, so he began with his level 2 chakra refining technique. The method was efficient. In just 3 hours, he replenished 600 chakra points. With his reserves restored, Nathan turned his attention to the fire style, Great Fireball technique. A C-rank offensive jutsu, it consumed a minimum of 50 chakra with each attempt. Currently, his proficiency sat at level 0, 52-100. Every time he went through the proper motions, regardless of whether the fireball formed, his mastery edged up slightly. To reach level 1, he needed 48 more successful practice cycles. At 50 chakra per try, that added up to 2,400 chakra points, nearly his entire daily capacity. Nathan frowned. Unless his physical endurance improved, or he discovered a more potent, easily absorbed soldier's pill, there was little hope of raising his chakra ceiling. Still, he steeled himself. Mastery of the Great Fireball was too valuable to postpone. He summoned 50 chakra, channeled it through his chest, shaped it in his palm, and unleashed the blaze into the open sky. The air crackled, a sphere of roaring flame burst forth and faded to nothing. Progress +1. He inhaled deeply, then repeated the process again and again. Refine chakra, gather it, mold it, release. 47 more times. It was going to be a long afternoon. Boom! A fireball spewed from Nathan's mouth and instantaneously swelled to a full 1.5 meters in diameter. When it crashed down, it carved a smoking crater into the earth. Even after the flames died, the scorched pit radiated relentless heat. By late afternoon, he'd pushed his fire style, Great Fireball technique up to proficiency level 0, 75-100. He still hadn't fully mastered the jutsu. Today's success was only a beginner's effort, but at least he could activate it with some consistency. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Nathan packed up and made his way home. After a quick dinner and a brief rest, he returned to training. With ninjutsu too dangerous to practice indoors, he devoted the evening to perfecting the reflection heart technique. Over and over, he repeated the hand seals, focusing every particle of chakra through his heart until the quiet of night and sheer exhaustion claimed him. Then, at last, he sank into a deep, dreamless sleep. For the following days, Nathan fell into the same relentless routine. Rise, train on the Great Fireball, rest, then refine his inner technique until midnight. It was grueling work, but he knew that only through persistence could he hope to become truly proficient. Chapter 13. Class Assignments. 5 days later, at first light, Nathan stood before the full-length mirror. He swept his long hair off his forehead, tied on his Konoha forehead protector, and straightened his uniform. A solemn weight settled over him. Graduating from the Ninja Academy meant he was now officially a shinobi. His survival, his success, everything ahead would depend on his own skill and resolve. After a heartbeat of reflection, Nathan summoned up the chakra proficiency display. Chapter X, 5 Days of Relentless Training. Nathan Uchiha sat in the twilight glow of the training ground, sweat dripping down his brow as he reviewed his progress. In just 5 days, he had transformed himself from a novice into a far more formidable shinobi. He paused to recall the details. Age 10, Constitution 6, Spirit 7, Chakra 862, a jump from 622. Sharing on Awakening 57-100, up from 52. Skills and Proficiencies, Chakra Refining Technique. Level Point 2, 69-500, up from 9. Clone Technique, Level 2, 1-500. Transformation Technique, Level 2, 1-500. Substitution Technique, Level 2, 1-500. Fire Release, Fireball Jutsu, Level 1, 1-200, unlocked from Level 0 at 75-100. Reflecting Heart Art, Level 1, 65-200, up from 10. Basic Physical Skills, Level Point 2, 1-500. Ninja Tool Throwing, 120-500. He closed his eyes, replaying the regimen that had pushed him to these new heights. On the first 2 days, Nathan devoted every ounce of his chakra to mastering Fire Release, High Fireball Jutsu. The crackle of flames and the roar of his unleashed power became his constant companions. By the end of the second day, the basics had solidified. He had formulated a reliable trump card for future battles. Day 3 through 5 belonged entirely to the Reflecting Heart Art. Nathan sat in perfect lotus, his mind emptied of distractions. He poured chakra into the technique again and again, over 10,000 chakra points in total. With each surge of energy, the runes of the jutsu burned brighter in his vision until he could feel its essence woven into his spirit. When Nathan finally stood, the improvement was undeniable. His reflecting hard art proficiency had jumped by 55 points, vaulting from 10 to 65. More remarkably, this deep dive into the art had accelerated his Sharingan's awakening, adding 5 points to its progress. He knew why. For every 10 points of proficiency in the reflecting hard art, his Sharingan grew 1 point closer to activation. Now, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Nathan brushed ash from his cloak and allowed himself a small, satisfied grin. The path of a shinobi was long and fraught with challenges, but in these 5 days, he had proven that with focus and determination, even the loftiest goals could be within reach. Tomorrow, he would press on, stronger, faster, wiser, and continue forging his destiny beneath the Uchiha crest. At last, Nathan understood why no one in the Uchiha clan had ever awakened the Sharingan through this method. Every time he performed the reflecting heart technique 10 times, his awakening gauge crept forward, but only because he could watch each point tick up on his proficiency panel. Without that constant feedback, earning even 10 proficiency points per cycle would be nearly impossible, and the higher you climbed, the slower you progressed. What's more, if your mastery of the reflecting heart technique didn't meet a certain threshold, your Sharingan wouldn't advance at all. In short, to unlock the Sharingan, you must continuously hone your skill in the reflecting heart technique. Nathan's ability to track his incremental gains kept him motivated, but most Uchiha, unable to perceive such subtle improvements, would give up long before seeing results. Even he might have grown frustrated if his initial Sharingan progress had already been above 7100, and he discovered that level 0 and level 1 of the technique produced no visible effect. Nathan wondered, who in their right mind would spend years, possibly even more than a decade, mastering an obscenely difficult illusion that had almost no practical value? Talent aside, without any positive feedback, what could keep someone going? And the final steps of awakening the Sharingan weren't supposed to be easy breakthroughs either. It would take even more willpower to persevere that far. Still, Nathan wasn't worried. He had his proficiency panel keeping track of every milestone. As long as the panel confirmed that his chosen path was viable, he'd see it through. Shaking off his thoughts, Nathan stepped away from the full-length mirror where he'd been practicing, locked his door, and sprinted toward the Ninja Academy. Inside the classroom, Nathan slipped into the back row. He scanned the faces of graduating students, some familiar, some strangers, trying to guess which of them might end up in his squad. Every so often, he tapped his foot in anticipation. About half an hour later, a young instructor opened the door and strode in, clutching a roster. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Nathan had expected to see Shanmu Yiteng step up to the podium, but instead, a different figure stood before the class, a young teacher from another homeroom named Gong Baoe. He raised his hand and spoke in a calm, authoritative voice. "All right, everyone, quiet down." The chatter died away as Gong Baoe clapped his hands gently and introduced himself. "My name is Gong Baoe. Some of you may have heard of me, others may not. That doesn't matter right now. First, let me congratulate you all. Starting today, you're officially Genin. You're real ninjas." A fresh wave of excitement rippled through the room. Whispers broke out, friends elbowed each other in eager competition for seatmates, and a few students bounced in their chairs, unable to contain their nerves. Gong Baoe raised a hand for silence, and the class finally settled. "Your instructors have already told you that today you'll be divided into teams of 3. Each trio will be assigned to an experienced jonin who will guide you through your missions. From this moment on, these teammates will become your closest allies and most trusted comrades in arms. So focus up. Your first mission briefing starts now." The students fidgeted and whispered among themselves, brimming with restless energy. Gong Baoe watched them for a few more moments without interrupting, then raised his voice. "All right, everyone. If you have questions, save them for later. Please quiet down. We're about to announce your class assignments." Instantly, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to Gong Baoe as he opened the roster and began to read. Class 11, Nakajima Suta, Hanako, Feilong. Class 12, Kimura Shota, Yamanaka Haru, Kuroda Ichiro. Class 10-3. A ripple of cheers and groans rolled through the students, but no one spoke out of turn. Finally, Gong Baoe continued. Class 17, Uchiha Nathan, Mizutani Shizuko, Ryosuke. Class 18. Nathan's heart pounded when he heard his name. He looked toward the front and saw two classmates stepping forward. First came Mizutani Shizuko, her expression calm and unreadable. Right behind her was a boy with bright, eager eyes, Ryosuke, a face Nathan recognized faintly from another class in his previous life. With a steadying breath, Nathan rose to join them, ready to begin this new chapter. Nathan studied his new teammate with cool, appraising eyes. She was a quiet girl from his class. Her stoic demeanor barely betrayed a hint of emotion, but he'd heard enough to piece together her background. Her father was a respected jonin, and although her physical stamina left something to be desired, her theoretical knowledge was rock solid. Nathan knew that, without activating his Sharingan, he couldn't accurately gauge her latent talent. Still, he felt confident the higher-ups wouldn't have paired a subpar ninja with an Uchiha prodigy. Even if the clan elders had stayed out of it, the lead jonin in charge of team assignments would never risk putting two agents of wildly differing ability on the same squad. It only makes command and control a nightmare. And let's be honest, true prodigies don't turn up every year, even in Konoha. Geniuses are rare. Most academy graduates count themselves lucky just to earn the rank of Chunin. So Nathan had no illusions about being stuck with some overhyped wonderkind. To him, a teammate was just that, a partner in missions, nothing more. The shinobi world was too perilous to indulge in sentiment. One moment of trust misplaced, one slip-up in battle, and any emotional investment would only become a liability. He shook off any lingering doubts. There was a clear-headed logic to his approach. Keep relationships professional, keep expectations reasonable, and show no weakness. In a matter of seconds, Nathan's mind was made up. He'd treat his teammate fairly, stay alert, and focus on getting stronger, just as any Uchiha would. By the time Gongbao finished calling the names, everyone in the classroom had already paired up. "All right," he said, "you'll have a few minutes to get to know your teammates. Soon your team leader will arrive. Just follow them when they do." With that, he stepped out of the room. No sooner had he closed the door than a flurry of movement broke out as students hurried to find their partners. Nathan glanced up as Ryosuke bounded over and slid into the empty seat beside him. "Hey there, I'm Ryosuke," the boy said, flashing a confident grin. Nathan set his book aside and replied evenly, "Uchiha Nathan." Then he turned his attention to the girl across the table. Under his steady gaze, Mizutani Shizuko's cheeks tinted pink. She huddled her shoulders and offered in a tiny, wavering voice, "I'm Mizutani Shizuko." After a bit of coaxing from Ryosuke, the three of them settled together. Ryosuke immediately launched into a steady stream of chatter, punctuated by the occasional response from Shizuko, while Nathan listened in polite silence. From their snippets of conversation, he learned that both of Ryosuke's parents were Chunin, one a specialist in code decryption, the other a barrier-class ninja. Nathan couldn't help but wonder how two professional shinobi had produced such a talkative son. Maybe Ryosuke just held it all in at home? Nathan was just drifting back into his own thoughts when Ryosuke abruptly turned to him. "Hey Nathan, what about your parents? You never told me anything." Nathan met Ryosuke's eager eyes and answered in a flat, calm tone, "They sacrificed themselves." Ryosuke's mouth fell open, then he awkwardly scratched the back of his head, unsure how to respond. Shizuko glanced between them, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Nathan." A brief, heavy silence settled over the table. Nathan closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself before he offered what he hoped would be a more comforting reply. "Sorry, Nathan, I really don't know," Ryosuke mumbled, avoiding Nathan's gaze. Nathan shook his head and offered a small, calm smile. "It's all right. It's over now." Despite Nathan's reassurance, Ryosuke stayed silent, cheeks still flushed with embarrassment. Mizutani Shizuko, sitting beside Ryosuke, opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Time and again she tried to muster the courage, but each time she fell short. Nathan didn't press her. Kind words were appreciated, but he didn't need them. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. 30 minutes later, more than a dozen jonin filed into the classroom. In truth, few of them were full jonin. Most held the rank of tokubetsu jonin, special jonin. They hadn't yet reached the combat prowess of a true jonin, but each possessed rare skills in a particular field. Officially, they carried the Jonin title, but in ability, they stood somewhere between Chunin and Jonin. It made practical sense. The war demanded every seasoned Jonin at the front lines, and the raw potential of these students was already clear. There was no point in diverting the village's elite when the backbone of Konoha needed every available shinobi on the battlefield. Reserve training matters, but nothing compares to the urgency of the front lines. Class 11, stand up. A special Jonin stood on the platform. At his command, Nakajima Kanata, Hanako, and Fei Long rose to their feet. Once he'd verified their names, he dismissed them, then called forward classes 12 and 13. Finally, it was class 17's turn. Uchiha Nathan, Mizutani Shizuko, Ryosuke? A scarred, middle-aged ninja inspected the three students from above. Here, sensei. Nathan answered for them. The Jonin flipped through his file, nodded, and said, "Good. Follow me." He strode out of the classroom. Nathan, Shizuko, and Ryosuke fell in behind him. 10 minutes later, they arrived at Training Ground 10, a remote clearing that under normal conditions lay half an hour's trek from the village center, though their hurried pace had cut the trip in half. Nathan still felt fresh, but both Shizuko and Ryosuke were visibly winded, especially Shizuko, whose slender frame wasn't built for rapid marches. Nathan's lungs burned as he pushed himself to keep pace. Beside him, Shizuko Mizutani's breaths came in ragged gasps, but she didn't slow. He'd thought about offering help. After all, this might be part of the Jonin's test, but from the look in her eyes, she could handle it. So Nathan let her struggle on her own. At last, the group reached the exact center of the training ground, and the middle-aged Jonin halted. Sweat glistened on his dark brow as he surveyed the three young shinobi, pausing on Nathan. Then he nodded once sharply. "You've all managed to keep up. Consider this your first trial." Shizuko bent forward, hands on her knees, panting. "A trial?" "Indeed." The Jonin's voice was steely. "On the battlefield, every second counts. No matter your specialty, reconnaissance, medical support, or frontline assault, if your stamina fails at the crucial moment, you endanger your comrades and jeopardize the mission. Worse, you risk your own life." Shizuko's cheeks went pale. On her very first day as a ninja, she had not expected to confront such harsh truths. But Nathan met her gaze and offered a small, steadying nod. If this was only the beginning, they had no choice but to press on. Shizuko Mizutani's thoughts drifted to Nathan's parents and their ultimate sacrifice. She stole a quick glance at him, wondering how he'd taken the news. He must have been heartbroken. Nathan met her gaze but said nothing. The middle-aged ninja overseeing their training cleared his throat. "All right, everyone, take a short rest." Ryosuke and Shizuko sank to the ground, gasping for air. Nathan remained standing at the edge of the clearing, calm and unfazed by the exertion. Sensei Furukawa leaned against a tree and surveyed his students. "Since we've got a lull, let's use the time to introduce ourselves." Ryosuke sat up. "Sensei, we don't even know your name yet." Furukawa smiled. "I'm Furukawa," he said. "I'm 37, a senior ninja of Kumo Village. I enjoy playing shogi, and I can't stand anyone who ignores the rules." He pointed at Ryosuke. "You first. Tell me your age, likes, dislikes, and what you aspire to be." Ryosuke squared his shoulders. "I'm Ryosuke, 15 years old. I love studying samurai history and mastering the blade. Dishonesty makes my blood boil. One day I hope to become a chunin and live up to my master's expectations." "Very good." Furukawa nodded, then turned to Shizuko. "Your turn." Shizuko rose gracefully. "I'm Shizuko Mizutani, 16. I'm drawn to medicinal herbs and healing techniques, and I despise needless violence. My dream is to serve as Kumo's chief medical ninja and save lives with my own hands." Finally, Furukawa's gaze fell on Nathan. Nathan inhaled deeply before speaking. "I'm Nathan, 16. I have a passion for strategy games and stealth tactics. I can't tolerate arrogance or injustice. My goal is to restore my clan's honor and protect the innocent." Furukawa folded his arms and cracked a rare smile. "Excellent. Now that we know one another, let's get back to training." "Furukawa?" The instructor's voice rang out across the training yard. Furukawa stood, expression unreadable, and replied simply, "Furukawa." Next, Ryosuke. A boy with bright eyes and a confident grin stepped forward. "I'm Ryosuke. I'm 10 years old. I love making friends, and I absolutely can't stand anything with coriander in it. My dream? To become Hokage someday." Nathan couldn't resist a wry thought. Another kid caught up in the will of fire, no doubt. The instructor nodded, then turned to the girl seated nearby. Mizutani Shizuko? Shizuko straightened her posture and took a steadying breath. I'm Shizuko Mizutani. I'll turn 10 right after the new year. I enjoy flower arranging, and as for pet peeves, I don't really have any that come to mind. She hesitated, glanced around the small circle of classmates, then found her resolve. My ideal is to become a medical ninja, just like Lady Tsunade. Tsunade? Nathan murmured under his breath. He'd heard plenty about the legendary Sannin. Her reputation truly lived up to the stories. No wonder she still managed to become the 5th Hokage after being gone from the village so long. Nathan hadn't even finished the thought when Sensei Furukawa turned to him. All right, Uchiha, your turn. He straightened up and cleared his throat. I'm Uchiha Nathan. I'm 10 and years old. He hesitated. I like training. I don't like trouble. And my ideal is... He froze, words dying on his lips. He'd never really thought about his ideal, much less any sort of long-term future. When he first traveled back in time, he'd worried that his outsider identity would be exposed, so he threw himself into endless drills. Once he'd absorbed his predecessor's memories, he'd been terrified of surviving the coming Ninja World War and the genocide he believed would follow, so he practiced even harder. Planning his future had never crossed his mind. All he'd ever focused on was getting through the next battle alive. Nathan? Mizutani Jingzi's soft voice roused him. She gave his arm a gentle poke. Are you okay? Chapter 15. Training. Oh! Shizuko Mizutani's sharp voice shattered the morning quiet and jolted Nathan from his reverie. He blinked, shook his head, and managed a small smile. It's nothing. A beat of silence passed before Nathan returned to the topic he'd been mulling over. My goal is to awaken the Sharingan and become a powerful shinobi. He spoke casually, but inwardly he felt no real attachment to that ambition. Given how steadily his reflection heart technique was advancing, the awakening of his Sharingan seemed all but guaranteed. With the proficiency panel guiding his training, growing into a top-tier ninja was almost a foregone conclusion. Claiming it as his ideal felt hollow. If pressed to name a true aspiration, Nathan knew what it would be. He dreamed of transcending this world to behold landscapes far beyond the shinobi realm. No matter how vast the 5 great nations or the entirety of the ninja world might seem, it was but a single flicker in the endless tapestry of the universe. Chakra's existence here could always be traced back to the Otsutsuki clan's celestial tree, yet why should their power mark the only horizon humanity could hope to reach? Out there, among the stars, lay untold wonders and powers greater still. Discovering them, mastering them, and witnessing the full scope of creation, that was the purpose that would truly set Nathan's heart on fire. Nathan clenched his fists beneath the table, the thought burning in his mind, but he couldn't voice it, at least not yet. So when Ryosuke shot him a curious look and asked, Sharingan? What's that? Nathan forced a casual shrug. Don't know what you mean. Beside Ryosuke, Mizutani Shizuko tilted her head, her dark eyes bright with curiosity. Despite their youth, the two of them were endlessly inquisitive, always hungry for knowledge just out of reach. Before Nathan could weave another excuse, Furukawa cut in. The Sharingan is the Uchiha clan's Kekkei Genkai, he began, voice low and confident. Only a ninja of at least Chunin rank can awaken it, and even then, only the very strongest. Its power is legendary. He paused, glancing toward the distant peaks of the Valley of the End, visible beyond the village walls. After a moment's silence, he added quietly, so legendary in fact, that some say its greatest wielder rivals the so-called God of Shinobi. Nathan felt a pang of unease. To the older generation of Jonin who'd fought in the Second Shinobi World War, Uchiha Madara wasn't just a name but a living, breathing force of nature. For most of their peers, however, Madara had slipped into myth, his feats immortalized only by the towering faces carved into the Hokage monument. As Furukawa fell silent, the 4 of them sat under the fading afternoon sun, each lost in thoughts of power, legacy, and the hidden depths of a name as mysterious as the Sharingan itself. Anyone who aspires to become Hokage will, almost instinctively, learn about the deeds of those who came before, and the first Hokage is no exception. Every hopeful studies how he ended the age of turmoil and founded the Hidden Leaf Village, so admiration for Hashirama Senju is a given. His reputation is untouchable, which makes it all the more astonishing when someone dares suggest there's a newcomer whose talent rivals his. Furukawa, however, chose not to pursue the comparison. While Uchiha Madara isn't an absolute taboo in Konoha, dwelling on him too much can invite needless complications. Earlier, Furukawa had simply been struck by Nathan's bold ideals. Beyond that, he knew very little about the Uchiha clan, and one critical fact hovered in the back of his mind. Nathan had been placed under a non-Uchiha mentor because his chances of awakening the Sharingan were virtually zero. Had there been any real hope, a senior Uchiha would have been assigned to guide him personally. So for now, Nathan's dream of manifesting the Sharingan would remain just that, a dream. But Furukawa would keep that truth to himself. It's good to have a clear goal to keep you from slacking off. After about 30 minutes of rest, Furukawa clapped his hands. All rested? Excellent. Let's move on to the next test. A test? Another one? Ryosuke sat up so quickly his shoulders hit the table, eyes wide with surprise. Beside him, Mizutani Shizuko's face fell in disappointment. Nathan, however, barely reacted. He'd expected this. Training under a jonin would never be as easy or as simple as the academy drills. He'd known more challenges were coming, perhaps a teamwork exercise or a test of mental endurance. Nathan refused to worry. Unless the psychological trial was as severe as Kakashi's, this next exam couldn't be that brutal. And Konoha needed ninja. If everyone flunked and got sent back to the academy, what would be the point of graduating early? Even if he did end up back in the academy, Nathan didn't really mind. Maybe that wouldn't be so bad either. Nathan sat there, wrestling with the same impossible thought. If he could survive just one more year, his strength would skyrocket. By the time he stepped back onto the battlefield, his odds of coming home alive would climb dramatically. But he knew it was a fantasy. Deliberately flunking a year? As if Konoha's leaders were naive enough to let that slide. One scan from a Byakugan user would expose the lie in an instant. You can't hoard chakra that way without having the skill to back it up. They'd brand him a deserter, maybe even a spy. Better to let things unfold on their own. Furukawa leaned back in his chair, his grin turning vicious. Consider that your introductory trial, he said, voice low and mocking. The real challenge starts now. He paused, savoring the tension in the room. Oh, and one more thing. A bead of sweat formed on Ryosuke's brow. He swallowed hard. What is it? If you don't pass this next test, Furukawa continued, you'll be sent back to the academy to repeat the entire year. Ryosuke's eyes widened. He bolted to his feet, chair scraping the floor. You've got to be kidding me. Nathan's heart sank. The thought of returning to the academy just to retake the course was unbearable. Teacher Furukawa, Liang-jae drawled, a sarcastic edge in his voice. Are you serious? Furukawa only chuckled softly, twice, without answering. From within his cloak he withdrew a scroll, holding it out in plain view. Your objective is simple, he said. Take this scroll from me. He glanced toward the sky, where the sun had climbed well above the horizon. You have until noon. Ryosuke frowned, crossing his arms. You're a jonin, and we're just genin. 3 versus 1. How do you expect us to wrest this away in 2 hours? Furukawa met his gaze evenly. Relax. I haven't finished. He raised a hand, palm outstretched, as if pointing to an invisible map. I won't strike first, and I'll limit myself to genin-level techniques. He turned to look at a distant peak half an hour's run away. That mountain, he said, is where we'll head. From here to there, you must snatch the scroll from me and make it back before the sun reaches its zenith. A tense silence fell over the 3 young shinobi. 2 hours, 1 scroll, and a jonin who wouldn't make it easy or predictable. They exchanged determined glances. It was the most daunting test they'd ever faced, and their only choice was to rise to it. Whether it's by ambush or by stealth, as long as you seize the scroll from me before noon, you'll pass, Furukawa declared. Ryosuke stroked his chin thoughtfully. Nathan exchanged a quick glance with his teammate and inwardly rolled his eyes. Where did this man get so much confidence? They were just 3 freshly minted genin, blank slates with limited training. Even if Furukawa pretended to be genin level himself, his battle experience was undeniable. Nathan kept his doubts to himself, however. He understood that Furukawa had no desire to make their trial needlessly difficult. The exercise he devised felt more like real combat, designed to push them, reveal their skills, and expose their weaknesses. In observing how each genin responded under pressure, Furukawa would gather the insights he needed to tailor their future instruction. And so, with the challenge set, Nathan squared his shoulders and prepared for whatever lay ahead. Nathan barely registered what was happening before Furukawa had already backed away. "You all take your time to talk things over. I'll go first," he said, then turned and strode off. Before Furukawa's words could fully sink in, Nathan sprang forward, yanking several shuriken from his ninja pouch. The stars of steel cut through the air with a hiss. Most were thrown to hem him in, but 2 hurtled straight for Furukawa's throat and heart. Nathan's attack was sudden and fierce. Any ordinary genin might have been incapacitated before he even understood what was happening. Furukawa, however, was no ordinary rookie. Though he had deliberately suppressed his chakra to genin levels, his battle-honed reflexes remained razor-sharp. In a heartbeat, he brought 2 kunai up, meeting the incoming blades with a pair of resounding clangs. The lethal shuriken glanced off harmlessly, but in defending himself, Furukawa's center guard swung wide open. Seizing the moment, Nathan closed the distance in a heartbeat, his next move poised and unhesitating. Nathan lashed out at once, kunai flashing in his hand as he drove the blades toward Furukawa's chest and abdomen. He felt the unsettling cold of steel grazing his own ribcage. Then Furukawa merely curved his lips into a half-smile and stepped back with effortless poise, dodging the strike. In that instant, the gap between adult and youth was laid bare. Nathan's perfectly aimed assault was easily shrugged off by Furukawa's superior strength. He didn't begrudge it. On the battlefield, age and size were facts you had to live with. If he couldn't match his opponent's power, he'd find another way to level the playing field. With that resolve, Nathan shifted his weight, body coiling like a panther, and slipped around to Furukawa's side, evading the inevitable counterattack. From that angle, he sprang off his right leg and delivered a sharp kick aimed at Furukawa's back. He'd hoped for the nape, but his stature betrayed him. All he could reach was the lower spine. It was enough to create an opening, barely, but Furukawa wouldn't allow even that small advantage. He slipped under Nathan's diagonal kick and whipped his elbow forward, aiming straight at Nathan's face. Not good. Nathan's heart leapt into his throat as he slammed his forearms up to block. Bam! A dull crash rattled through his arms, sending a shock of numbness up his limbs and hurling him backwards. In midair, Nathan twisted, found his center, and landed in a surprisingly graceful crouch. Nathan! Nathan! Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko finally sprang into action, drawing their kunai and rushing to his side. Nathan, are you all right? Ryosuke panted, his gaze flicking toward their opponent. Yeah, Nathan said, pushing himself to his feet. Not far off, Furukawa sheathed his own kunai and called over his shoulder, calm as ever. Not bad, Nathan, but you're no match for me alone. That scroll won't be yours. With that, he turned and melted into the shadows of the forest. As the underbrush swallowed the sound of his retreating footsteps, Ryusuke and Mizutani exchanged relieved looks and let out a quiet sigh. Standing against a jonin, no matter how brief the clash, had tested them more than they'd expected. Nathan didn't mind in the least. He'd only acted to land 3 solid hits on whatever targets he could, scheduled or not. If he succeeded, great. If he failed, at least he'd have measured Furukawa-sensei's so-called strength and set a personal benchmark. Nathan, what should we do now? Liang-jae withdrew his gaze from the field and looked to him for guidance. At the same moment, Mizutani Shizuko also turned expectantly. Both of them clearly viewed Nathan as their backbone, exactly what he'd intended. Real power earned people's trust. Empty talk never did. After his display just now, they'd be more than willing to follow his lead. He didn't care about holding the captain's title, but having their support would make everything run more smoothly. Meeting their eyes, Nathan said, Furukawa-sensei called this a test, so there shouldn't be any real danger. Let's give it everything we've got, Ryosuke said, a spark of excitement in his eyes. Yeah, why didn't I think of that? Liang-jae chimed in. With a whoop, Ryosuke slapped his hands together. Then what are we waiting for? Let's move. Nathan forced a grin. If only it were that simple, he thought. He knew the road ahead would be anything but easy, but he kept his concerns to himself. His teammates needed to feel confident right now. Clearing his throat, he issued instructions. "All right," Nathan said. "Ryosuke, you cover our rear. Liang-jae, stay close beside me. Shizuko, you take the center." "Wait, why guard the back so tightly?" Ryosuke asked, frowning. "Didn't Mr. Furukawa say he wouldn't strike unless provoked?" "Better safe than sorry," Nathan replied. Liang-jae gave a reluctant nod, falling into step. Nathan then glanced back at Shizuko. "Everything all right?" he asked. Shizuko Mizutani managed a small, reassuring smile. "I'm fine." "Good," Nathan said. "Then let's go." He set off in the direction Furukawa had headed. Shizuko and Ryosuke fell in behind him, each alert for whatever lay ahead. Buried deep beneath the surface, unseen by Nathan and the others, Furukawa had slipped into the earth with the earth escape and reflecting fish technique. From his subterranean vantage point, he watched their every move. When Nathan cautioned, "Stay sharp, and you won't make a serious mistake," Furukawa silently nodded in approval. For a shinobi, vigilance is everything, and Nathan's insistence on caution, even after promising not to strike first, spoke volumes about his character. Yet there was more to Nathan than mere prudence. The very moment he spoke those words, he unleashed a swift attack, revealing a daring spirit that balanced restraint with decisive action. Cautious yet bold, a true natural ninja. What Furukawa didn't realize was that Nathan's conduct sprang from echoes of a former life. Even if he had known, he wouldn't have cared. Other people's opinions are just that, opinions. To forge iron, you subject it to fire. To become strong, you must endure challenges. Every step Nathan takes toward power gives meaning to his choices. And now, with Furukawa's watchful eyes still buried below, our focus returns to Nathan and his companions on the surface. Nathan and his companions pressed forward through the dense forest, following the trail of clues that Furukawa had deliberately left behind, just as their teacher had shown them. Hidden snares snapped shut at their heels, tripwires hummed through the underbrush, and swinging blades threatened from the shadows. But Nathan, Liangsuke, and Mizutani Shizuko worked in perfect unison. Nathan disarmed each trap with a well-aimed kunai. Liangsuke smashed through concealed roots, and Shizuko used her keen eyes to warn them of danger until every hazard lay dismantled at their feet. By midday, the three emerged from the trees onto the windswept peak. There, already waiting, stood Furukawa, calm, collected, and unmistakably in control. In his hand was the sealed scroll, its parchment fluttering in the breeze. At the sight of them, he flicked his wrist and sent it sailing toward the rocky ground between them. "Time's up," he called out, his voice echoing across the summit. "What will you do now?" Nathan glanced at Liangsuke, his pulse quickening. They knew this was their only chance. In an instant, the two of them split, Liangsuke sweeping in from the left, Nathan from the right, closing the distance to cut off any escape. At the same moment, Shizuko drew a cluster of shurikens and kunai from her belt. With a deep breath, she let them fly, forcing Furukawa onto the defensive. One by one, the metal darts hissed toward him, but he spun like water, evading each projectile with uncanny grace. Seizing the opening, Nathan vaulted forward and thrust his kunai in a swift arc aimed at Furukawa's midsection. The sharp blades met with a ringing clash, metal against metal, showering sparks across the rocky ground. Furukawa's foot braced. His own kunai rose to meet Nathan's strike head-on. The battle was joined in earnest. Ryusuke surged forward, kunai in hand, and drove the blade toward Furukawa's back. His aim was perfect, until a flicker of hesitation, whether from reluctance to truly hurt him or some other impulse, made him pause. That fraction of a second was all Furukawa needed. He twisted sideways, letting the kunai hiss past him. "Face your enemy, boy." Furukawa growled as he whirled to confront Ryusuke again. But the warning came too late. A thin smile curved on Ryusuke's lips, and in the same instant his left hand blurred toward Furukawa's chest, hunting for the hidden scroll. His movement was astonishingly swift. "Oh no," Furukawa hissed, mind racing. "You sly brat!" He snapped backward, chest heaving, as the scroll's protective wrapping saved it from Ryusuke's grasp. A rush of relief swept through him. He exhaled sharply and muttered, "That was too close." But then Ryusuke's right hand flipped the kunai between his fingers. Before Furukawa could brace himself, the blade stabbed into his abdomen with devastating precision. Furukawa cried out, clutching at the wound as crimson seeped through his fingers. Nathan, who'd been the first to charge in to Furukawa's aid, skidded to a halt at the sight of blood. His panicked scream broke the air, but as he cried out, something unimaginable happened. His form wavered, as if he were dissolving. In a matter of heartbeats, Nathan's shape solidified again, not as himself, but as Ryusuke. The same dark hair, the same cold, determined eyes. Nathan's voice, now Ryusuke's, cut through the stunned silence. "Now," the new Ryusuke said softly, "let's see who truly holds the advantage." Furukawa bowed his head respectfully, casting a look of admiration at Langsuke. In the next instant, his form dissolved into a swirl of chakra-infused smoke. As the mist cleared, a scroll drifted to the ground, the very mission objective Nathan and his team had been sent to retrieve. Chapter 17, Chakra Control. Nathan scooped up the scroll from the forest floor. With a steady exhale, he released the transformation jutsu and shifted back into his true form, shedding the guise of Ryusuke. In fact, both Nathan and Ryusuke that had faced Furukawa were mere illusions. They had swapped identities with transformation techniques to lower his guard, and it was the only way to wrest the scroll from him. What Nathan hadn't anticipated was discovering that Furukawa, who'd matched them blow for blow, was himself only a shadow clone. Even a copy of a jonin had outmaneuvered them, a stark reminder of Furukawa's formidable skill. A ripple of applause suddenly rang out among the trees. Startled, Nathan, Ryusuke, and Mizutani Shizuko turned to see Furukawa Shishiran stepping into the clearing. "Master Furukawa!" Ryusuke and Shizuko called out together, bowing respectfully. Furukawa inclined his head, then fixed his gaze on Nathan. "You didn't hesitate to act earlier," he remarked, his tone calm but edged with approval. Nathan met his eyes, pulse quickening at the subtle praise. This unexpected test, and Furukawa's unshakable calm, had revealed more about the jonin's strength than any direct fight could. Now, with the scroll in hand and the real Furukawa before them, Nathan wondered what deeper trials still lay ahead. "Aren't you afraid of hurting me?" Shizuko asked, her voice tinged with concern. Nathan shook his head. "Master Furukawa is a jonin. His strikes can't seriously harm you. If we didn't hold back, if our goal was truly to kill, you'd have lost that scroll long ago." "Exactly," Master Furukawa agreed, a satisfied smile creasing his face. He turned to Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko. "And you two weren't bad at all." "Sensei, does that mean we passed the test?" Ryosuke blurted out, heart-pounding. "Absolutely," Furukawa replied. "Congratulations. You won't have to return to the academy for extra training." "Yes," Ryosuke whooped, pumping a fist in the air. Shizuko's eyes lit up with excitement. Only Nathan remained composed, though a hint of a smile tugged at his lips. Once the cheers died down, Master Furukawa clapped his hands. "To celebrate the formation of Team 17, I'm taking you all out for barbecue." Ryosuke's grin grew even wider, and Nathan, who'd nearly lost his stomach after so many doses of those bitter cooling pills, couldn't help but laugh. The prospect of sizzling meat and laughter with his teammates was a welcome reward. Nathan returned to the Uchiha compound just after noon, a sly grin curling at the corners of his mouth. He couldn't shake the memory of Furukawa's pained expression from earlier, so deliciously satisfying that, for a moment, he almost regretted not spending his coins on barbecue just to spite him. But truth be told, humiliating Furukawa was a feast unto itself. Still, such trifles would have to wait. The entire morning had slipped away, and he needed to stick to today's training regimen. With his chakra refinement technique stalled at level 1 and his body and mind now stabilized, Nathan could channel between 2,400 and 2,500 chakra points daily. He planned to dedicate 2,000 of those points to mastering the heart-reflecting art. At 10 proficiency points per day, his skill in the technique would soar, and his Sharingan awakening gauge would climb by 1 point each session. At that pace, he'd push his Sharingan to 7,100 in under half a month. Once he'd reached that milestone and elevated the heart-reflecting art to level 2, he'd draft the next phase of his plan. Settling cross-legged on the polished floor, Nathan closed his eyes and summoned the steady flow of chakra deep within. The air around him hummed with focused energy as he prepared to begin. Nathan ran a hand through his hair as he replayed Furukawa's parting words. "Be in front of the Hokage's office at 9 tomorrow morning. We'll begin assigning missions then." He sighed. As he'd suspected, the village had no intention of sending its newest genin straight to the battlefield, but it wouldn't let them lounge around either. Over the coming weeks, he'd probably be stuck doing the same menial chores every graduating class endured, tracking down stray cats and dogs, collecting garbage, escorting lost children. All meant to teach mission protocols and life as a shinobi, but to Nathan, it felt like time wasted. That time, however, was priceless. His real priority was mastering his chakra control and pushing forward the awakening of his Sharingan. At this stage, even slight fluctuations in chakra consumption for a single jutsu could derail his entire meditation schedule, and the potency of each technique stimulation on his Sharingan might vary from day to day. To stay on track, he needed at least 10 hours every night dedicated purely to chakra refinement. But there were only 24 hours in a day. Chores or chakra training, the two couldn't coexist. Nathan closed his eyes, determined. Whatever the Hokage's office had in store, he would find a way to balance the bookkeeping and the garbage runs with his relentless practice. He refused to let busy work stall his progress. Tomorrow at 9, the real test would begin, and he would be ready. Nathan realized that, beyond eating, drinking, and sleeping, he had almost no free time. He needed a way to solve his chakra shortage, and quickly. After hours of thought, he narrowed his options to 3. 1. Boost his body's natural chakra regeneration by raising his physical and mental stats. The catch? That kind of progress takes months, maybe years. It was out of the question for now. 2. Speed up his chakra recovery per hour by upgrading his chakra refining technique. Moving from level 2 to level 3 requires 500 proficiency points. Nathan currently has under 70. Even if he meditated the maximum 12 hours a day, gaining no more than 12 points daily, he'd still need over a month. Too slow. 3. The only realistic path was the third option. The very next afternoon, under Furukawa's watchful eye, Nathan and 2 other villagers shouldered wicker baskets and stepped into the shallow river at the village's edge. Their task: scour the riverbed for discarded bottles, broken pottery, and whatever else had washed downstream. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but Nathan was determined. Whatever this third option required, he would do what it took. Langsuke kept up a steady stream of complaints as Nathan waded into the shallow river. He moved slowly, crouching to pluck bits of trash from the water's surface. At first glance, it looked as if he were actually walking on water. His feet never touched the riverbed, yet he advanced without sinking. Minutes later, Nathan felt a subtle shift in his awareness. A voice in his mind, his own inner trainer, he supposed, announced, Proficiency +1. Chakra Control, 6100. Live by 0, 6100. He allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. This was exactly the result he'd been aiming for. He'd devised a third training method focused on refining chakra control to lower the energy cost of ninjutsu. In the ninja world, every technique consumes a precise amount of chakra. Channel too much or too little, and the jutsu either fizzles out or wastes precious energy. Mastering the art of precise chakra distribution was vital. Over centuries, ninja clans had honed 2 core exercises to develop this skill: tree climbing and water walking. Both demanded that chakra be funneled into the soles of the feet with exquisite accuracy. Just a fraction too much or too little chakra at those points, and you'd plunge through the branches or sink straight through the water's surface. Nathan rose to his full height, the river rippling around his ankles. He inhaled deeply, letting the cool air settle his focus. Each step forward required barely enough chakra to counteract gravity. It was a subtle balance, but with every careful movement, he grew more confident. Behind him, Liangsuke let out another disgruntled sigh. Nathan shot his companion a glance. Quit complaining and keep your eyes open, he said. We're not here just to pick up litter. Liangsuke uffed but fell silent. Nathan returned his attention to the river, determined to perfect the next cycle of chakra control, an inch closer to the level of mastery every ninja aspired to. Nathan focused intently on his chakra control practice. With a single thought, he summoned his status panel. The familiar pale blue interface bloomed before his eyes. Name: Uchiha Nathan, age 10. Physiques: Spirit 7 Chakra, 215, Max 910, 862, and 10. Bloodline: Sharingan, unawakened. 58-100, 57-58. Skills: Chakra Refinement Technique, Level 2, 8100, 669-81. Clone Technique 2, 1500, Transformation Technique, 2-1-500. Substitution Technique, Elf 2-1-500. Fire Style, Great Fireball Technique, Level 1-1-200. Reflection Technique, Level 1-1-2-65-77. Basic Physical Technique, Level 2-1-500. Ninja Tool Throwing, Level 2-1-2500. Chakra Control, Level 0-61-100. Because training chakra control requires very little chakra and can be practiced alongside other techniques, Nathan had already boosted it to 61% toward level 1. That modest improvement would reduce his chakra consumption for each ninjutsu by roughly 3%, an apparently small gain, but one that would compound significantly over time. Furthermore, as Nathan continues to train, his chakra control will steadily improve, and with better control comes greater effectiveness. He'll be able to perform more ninjutsu with the same amount of chakra, effectively solving the time constraint problem. The only real trade-off might be a marginal slowdown in mastering the chakra refining technique, but since that isn't his immediate focus, a slight delay is hardly a concern. Chapter 18, A Swift Fortnight. Nathan stared down at the crystalline surface of the pond, focusing his mind on the task ahead. Today was the deadline for his chakra control assignment. Could he really master it in time? "Nathan, what are you doing?" came Ryosuke's voice from his right. Nathan looked up to see Ryosuke gawking at his feet, which hovered a few inches above the water. "How are you standing on water?" he blurted. Glancing downward, Nathan confirmed what Ryosuke had seen. The water was so clear he could easily make out the ripples just beneath his soles. "I'm practicing chakra control," he replied casually. Ryosuke folded his arms and raised an eyebrow. "What good is that?" Before Nathan could answer, Sensei Furukawa approached from the training grounds. "It's extremely valuable," the teacher said, smiling as he neared. "Sensei?" Nathan, Ryosuke, and their friend chorused in greeting. Furukawa nodded in acknowledgement, then crouched to inspect Nathan's feet. "Mastering this skill will let you conserve chakra when you learn and cast ninjutsu," he explained. "It also helps you sustain your power throughout a battle. Keep at it, Nathan. You're making excellent progress." "More lasting stamina," Furukawa concluded. "Then, can we learn it?" Ryosuke asked, eyes bright with hope. Furukawa hesitated, weighing his words. "I hadn't planned to teach this technique so early," he admitted. "But Nathan has already begun practicing on his own, so you too should follow suit." In truth, Furukawa had noticed Nathan's secret training long ago. He'd chosen not to intervene, curious to see how far Nathan could advance without instruction. His patience was rewarded. Nathan wasn't a prodigy, yet within hours he had achieved a level of chakra control that most only reach after months of disciplined guidance. If Furukawa had supervised him from the start, teaching the standard approach of climbing a tree first, then practicing water treading, Nathan's progress would have been even swifter. But Furukawa's experiment had its own merits. Nathan proved himself capable of independent refinement. Now, with the proficiency panel as their guide, the students would learn the established steps. They would focus chakra into the soles of their feet, hold it steady, and gradually build up their efficiency. As their proficiency increased, so too would the precision and endurance of their chakra control. Furukawa watched Nathan with quiet approval. The young man had already shown remarkable initiative, and soon, under formal instruction, he would surpass even Furukawa's lofty expectations. "There's no need to start with tree climbing. It won't really speed up your proficiency gains." "Sensei, should we begin with treading water drills then?" Ryosuke Kamiya blurted out, eyes wide with excitement. "No," Furukawa replied flatly. "Why not?" Liang Jie asked, genuinely puzzled. He almost told them the truth, that Nathan was simply a prodigy and they weren't, but decided that would only discourage everyone. Instead, he offered, "Everyone's situation is different. Nathan can afford to work on his treading right away, but that wouldn't be the best approach for you." "Then what should we do?" Ryosuke pressed. "Climb a tree," Furukawa said. "Climb a tree?" Ryosuke and Shizuko Mizutani echoed in unison. "That's right," the teacher confirmed. Then he turned to Nathan. "You go ahead and practice here." Nathan nodded. "Understood. We'll come along." Furukawa motioned for Ryosuke and Shizuko, and the three students slipped into the nearby woods toward a cluster of tall, sturdy trees. Nathan followed Master Furukawa's demonstration to the letter, and soon the exercise settled into a predictable rhythm. Focus chakra, sprint toward the tree, leap up its bark, tumble back to the ground, and then do it all over again. But Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko were determined not to fall behind. Ryosuke, for all his careless air, harbored a fierce competitive streak. He never complained about Furukawa's obvious favoritism toward Nathan, yet every time he in bed and fell, his eyes blazed with the resolve to prove himself. And Mizutani Shizuko, though quiet and reserved, possessed an equally unyielding spirit. He voiced little opinion, but once he committed to a task, he threw his whole being into its completion. Together with Nathan, the three of them made an impressive team, far from the average genin. After all, only the most promising young shinobi would be chosen to train alongside a peer as gifted as Nathan and receive direct instruction from a jonin. In his previous life, Nathan had never even heard of Ryosuke or Shizuko. If history had taught him anything, it was that the two of them, like so many others, would likely be claimed by the Third Ninja War or the missions that followed. Yet for now, they were here, pushing themselves higher, determined not to let their talents go to waste. Nathan had seen firsthand just how ruthless ninja warfare could be and how perilous the path of a shinobi was. Whenever he dwelled on those harsh truths, he refused to let himself grow complacent. Instead, he strove to make the most of every moment, sharpening his skills and laying the groundwork for whatever lay ahead. Time, however, showed no mercy. In the blink of an eye, another fortnight slipped by. It was now early November, deep within Uchiha territory at Nathan's family estate. Late one night, with the moon hanging low in the sky, he wrapped up his final round of training. His muscles ached and sweat clung to his brow as he staggered back inside. With a weary sigh, he opened the small panel in the wall, his only link to messages from the outside world, and allowed himself a moment to rest. Nathan Uchiha, age 10. Constitution, Spirit, Chakra, 1546, current. Bloodline, Sharingan, unawakened, 7100. Skills and proficiencies, Chakra Refining Technique, level 2 4500. Clone Technique, 2, 14500. Transformation Technique, level 23500. Substitution Technique, 2, 110,500. Fire Style, Great Fireball Technique, 1,200. Reflection Technique, level 2, 1500. Basic Physical Technique, level 2, 15500. Ninja Tool Throwing, level 2, 26500. Chakra Control, level 2, 350. Over the past 2 weeks, everything had gone remarkably well for Nathan. By day, he accompanied his squad on missions that demanded little more than endurance and teamwork. By night, he retreated to the training grounds for solitary practice. At first, the daytime assignments ate into his precious training hours. But with each incremental increase in his chakra control skill, those interruptions weighed on him less and less. When he first advanced from level 0 to 1, the improvement cut the chakra cost of his ninjutsu by 5%. Reaching level 2 doubled that benefit to a 10% reduction. Now, with his chakra control sitting at 350-500 toward level 2, he'd effectively slashed his chakra expenditure by 13.5%. That savings freed up nearly a sixth of his chakra reserve every time he unleashed technique after technique, transforming what once felt like drudgery into a series of confident, fluid motions. As Nathan wiped the sweat from his brow and surveyed the horizon beyond the training field, he felt the taut coil of expected challenge unwind, replaced by a simmering anticipation. With every stat point gained and every skill refined, he inched closer to awakening the Sharingan, an advancement that would change everything. And tonight, as the moon rose over the village fence, Nathan's resolve burned brighter than ever. Nathan's recent breakthroughs meant that he now expended nearly 15% less chakra whenever he cast the same ninjutsu, a substantial saving. Even allowing for the extra training sessions he squeezed in on his days off, he only fell a day or two behind his original timetable for upgrading Reflection of the Heart technique to level 2. True to expectations, his Sharingan awakening jumped 13 points, moving from 58 100s up to 71 100. The only downside was that, despite the upgrade, the technique's minimum chakra requirement didn't drop. What did improve dramatically was his seal creation speed. But that alone couldn't shave off chakra costs. On the bright side, the new efficiency had snapped his Sharingan progress back to its earlier pace, undoing the slight slowdown he'd suffered before. For now, he could still execute 10 consecutive reflection of the heart techniques and advance his Sharingan by 1 point each cycle, so long as he kept up the momentum. As for clearing everything in a single push, Nathan hadn't even considered it. If mastering it were truly that easy, someone in the Uchiha clan would already have awakened the Sharingan using this method. Nathan figures he must advance his reflection of the heart technique to at least level 3 before attempting it, and that goal is well within reach. Over the past 2 weeks, under Furukawa's rigorous tutelage, he's made steady progress not only on the reflection technique and the Sharingan, but across his entire skill set. Limited chakra reserves have kept his overall growth moderate, but low-cost abilities, like the 3-body technique, the basic physical technique, and his ninja tool throwing, have each jumped by over 100 proficiency points. Most impressively, his chakra control has soared 2 ranks, from novice to level 2, 350-500, since he can practice it anywhere, at any time. It's now his best developed skill. By contrast, his fire style, Great Fireball technique, consumes at least 100 chakra points per cast, so he's had little opportunity to drill it, and it's only gained about 10 points of proficiency so far. Nathan felt a surge of energy rippling through him as he checked his new chakra readings. His limit had jumped from 910 to 1,546 points, enough to place him squarely in the middle tier of civilian Chunin-level shinobi. It was a stark reminder that sometimes the difference between two ninja can be greater than the gap between a person and a dog. He couldn't help but think of Kakashi Hatake. Rumor held that Kakashi's reserves were modest, yet whenever his Sharingan snapped open, chakra poured out in torrents. He'd famously unleashed Lightning Cutter, Raikiri, and Kamui, both S-rank techniques, several times in a row, then followed up with B-rank jutsu like Earth Style, Mud Wall, and Lightning Style, Shadow Clone. By any fair calculation, Kakashi's total chakra expenditure easily topped 10,000 points. In comparison, any talk of running low on chakra seemed purely relative. Many jonin would never come close to his stamina. Nathan smiled to himself. If even Kakashi had those reserves, then Nathan still had plenty of room to grow. This was only the beginning. Chapter 19, C-Rank Mission. Nathan arrived at the Hokage's office exactly at 9 o'clock the next morning. Before he even reached the entrance, Ryosuke's cheerful call carried across the courtyard. "Nathan, over here!" Nathan glanced over and saw Ryosuke waving enthusiastically, with Mizutani Shizuko standing quietly at his side. He quickened his pace. "Good morning, Ryosuke." "Shizuko." "Morning," Shizuko whispered, offering a small nod. Ryosuke folded his arms and raised an eyebrow. "Right on the dot again, huh? Can't you ever get here a bit early?" Nathan shrugged casually. "You got here first. Sensei said meet at 9, and it's not even 9 yet." Ryosuke let out an exasperated sigh. "You're such an enigma. You finish your assignments, vanish without a trace. I swear I have no idea what you do with your time." Nathan smiled inwardly. What does he think I'm doing? Of course I'm training. But there's no need to spell that out. Instead, he tucked his hands into his sleeves and waited for the others to regroup. Nathan deliberately ignored the remark and settled down to wait for Guchuan's arrival. As he sat, he quietly gathered small pulses of chakra beneath his feet, honing his chakra control skill. Although this method wasn't as efficient as climbing trees or treading water, it could be practiced anywhere, anytime, and that steady repetition was paying off. He estimated that in another 4 or 5 days, he'd reach level 3 proficiency, at which point he could conserve 15% of his chakra. Beyond that, however, progress would slow. Simply channeling chakra under his soles would likely yield diminishing returns, and he'd have to devise new training techniques. Nathan's ultimate aim was clear, to master the fine chakra threads used by Sand Village puppeteers. Condensing chakra into such slender filaments, and then manipulating them with precision, demanded an exceptionally high degree of control. When he reached level 3, he'd be well on his way, but the real challenge lay ahead. If we can find the right training method, our chakra control will improve, but that can wait. For now, our priority is awakening the Sharingan. At 9 o'clock sharp, a familiar figure slipped into view. Nathan and the others leapt to their feet. "Sensei?" they called in unison. Furukawa nodded, his sharp gaze flicking down to Nathan's feet before he spoke. "Since everyone's here, let's head inside." They followed him through the gates of the Hokage building and into a broad, vaulted hall. Around its perimeter stood a semicircle of wooden booths, each one manned by a chunin responsible for reviewing and dispatching missions. The group made their way toward the central desk. On the way, Ryosuke let out a theatrical sigh. "Sensei Furukawa, what are we doing today, huh? Picking up trash again? Or babysitting some brat who wandered into the village?" Furukawa didn't bother to turn around. "No." Everyone paused, waiting for him to continue. At last he added, "Today we're taking on a C-rank mission." "A C-rank?" Ryosuke's eyes went wide, and Nathan's did too. "Seriously?" they blurted together. In Konoha, newly graduated Jonin must complete at least 8 D-rank missions before they'll be cleared to take on C-rank assignments, and only after that can they even consider sitting for the Chunin exams. D-rank tasks rarely involve combat. They're mostly errands and mundane chores designed to give rookies a feel for real ninja work. C-rank jobs, by contrast, often put Shinobi up against bandits, mountain brigands, or other dangerous criminals. They're never guaranteed safe. Nathan reviewed their recent record. In the past 2 weeks, his squad had only finished 4 D-rank missions, half the minimum required. They weren't even close to qualifying for C-rank work. And yet, earlier today, Konoha's council had ordered them to gear up for something more. He felt his pulse quicken. On one hand, the village wasn't tossing them straight into the maelstrom of war. On the other, it wasn't easing them in with routine training either. If his calculations were right, Konoha intended to accelerate their field experience, fast. Nathan closed his eyes and drew a steady breath. His heart might have settled after the shock of the orders, but now a fresh surge of urgency took hold. Whatever lay ahead, he knew there was no turning back. Nathan watched Ryosuke's shoulders bounce with excitement. "At last, we're finally leaving the village," Ryosuke crowed. Nathan said nothing. He fell into step behind Guchuan, content to let his friend learn for himself. After all, they were comrades now. Ryosuke didn't need Nathan pointing out every detail. At the mission counter, Guchuan exchanged a few quiet words with the attendant. The attendant produced a scroll, sealed in red wax. Guchuan broke the seal and unrolled it. Task: suppress bandits. Location: Mount Xiaohei. Description: a gang of bandits has entrenched itself on Xiaohei Mountain, severely disrupting trade along the business road below. They must be eliminated as soon as possible. Rank: C. Objective: kill all bandits. Reward: 75,000 taels. Nathan took the scroll and scanned its contents. A direct combat assignment. No puzzles, no negotiations, just straightforward fighting. He glanced at Guchuan and thought, he clearly values raw battle ability over everything else. Where other instructors might dwell on tactics or moral lessons, Guchuan's priorities were plain. Real danger, real enemies, real results. Nathan tucked the scroll into his pack and followed the others out of the village, ready to prove himself on the road to Xiaohei Mountain. Nathan studied the mission briefing carefully. There were 2 kinds of C-rank assignments: direct combat operations and escort duties. Escort missions, by far the easier of the two, rarely ended in bloodshed. After all, bandits and thieves are only human, and when they spot a ninja escort, they often decide it isn't worth the risk. A genin on such a job must steel himself for stress, but usually never draws his blade. Direct combat missions, on the other hand, almost guarantee a fight. Real swords clash, bullets fly, and someone is bound to bleed. In theory, a novice shinobi should build his experience by tackling the safer, simpler C-rank tasks before moving on to the deadly ones. But Captain Furukawa made no such allowances. He assigned the hardest missions first, piling pressure on his genin. No wonder Ryosuke, who'd been brimming with excitement just moments ago, went completely silent after scanning the details. Beside him, Mizutani Shizuko's face drained of color. Nathan was only 10 years old. Despite the countless deadly techniques he'd mastered at the Ninja Academy, the moment he faced killing another human being, his heart wavered. He wasn't alone in that fear. His mentor, a seasoned adult, had confessed to the same trembling uncertainty before his first kill. Growing up in an era of peace, Nathan's instinct was to revere life above all else. Even though he carried the memories and the duties of a long line of predecessors, those deeply ingrained convictions didn't simply vanish overnight. Yet in the ninja world, where human lives are treated like currency to be spent, hesitation was a death sentence. If he couldn't steel himself against remorse, he would be the one left bleeding on the battlefield. To survive, he had to put his own safety first, and if that meant facing down these ruthless mountain bandits, so be it. After all, they were no innocent villagers, but marauders who preyed on defenseless people. Cutting them down wasn't cold-blooded murder, it was justice. Steeling his nerves, Nathan inhaled slowly and let the resolve sink in. With a final, silent vow to protect the innocent and himself, his racing pulse began to steady, and a grim determination settled into his bones. Guchuan stared at the three of them in silence and offered no words of comfort. "Return to your quarters, pack your gear, and be at the village gate by 10 tomorrow morning. Don't be late." With that, he vanished from the hall in a blur. Nathan watched him go, then turned to his two stunned companions without a word of consolation. Finally, he squared his shoulders. "I'm off," he announced, and set off down the corridor. Liangji lifted his hand as if to call after him, then let it drop. Whatever he'd meant to say faded unspoken. Chapter 20. Arrival. Nathan returned to the village and settled onto his cot for a moment before rising to pack his gear. Even though their mission didn't leave until tomorrow, he preferred to prepare early. Better to spot any missing items now than scramble at the last minute. He laid out his ninja pouch and methodically filled it. 6 kunai, 15 shuriken, a roll of steel wire, 5 explosive tags, a jar of trauma ointment, 2 rolls of bandages, 3 detoxification pills, and a pack of combat rations. Maps and other documents would be handled by Furukawa, so Nathan didn't need to worry about them. With his equipment stowed away, he seized the remaining daylight to train. No mission was scheduled today, which meant he could finish his exercises and conserve the bulk of his chakra for the operation tomorrow. Though the task at hand, suppressing a bandit cell, seemed straightforward, it still required venturing beyond the village walls, and in these war-torn times, complacency could be fatal. Enemy ninjas were known to infiltrate the Land of Fire under the guise of refugees or traders, so Nathan kept his guard high even on routine assignments. Satisfied with his preparations, he finally allowed himself a moment's rest, ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring. Nathan's team had one overriding objective: destabilize the Fire Country by striking its supply lines, assassinating key figures, and gathering vital intelligence. Yet just one wrong move in enemy territory could mean certain death. No matter how skilled Furukawa was, he was only a jonin, and if they were surrounded, even he couldn't guarantee their safety. Of course, the more likely scenario was that they'd slip through undetected and complete their mission without incident. But Nathan refused to rely on luck. He couldn't learn a new ninjutsu on the fly, nor could he master an advanced technique overnight. His greatest asset, the Sharingan, wouldn't simply awaken at his command. Equipment alone wouldn't win the day. What mattered most was having enough chakra stored for whatever lay ahead. To ensure he'd be at full strength, Nathan vowed to finish today's training swiftly so he could set aside every last reserve for tomorrow's operation. With that resolve, he closed his eyes and began molding his chakra, each passing minute bringing him one step closer to readiness. The room fell silent, broken only by the soft rhythm of Nathan's breathing. The next morning, just before 10 o'clock, Nathan arrived at the gates of Konoha. From a distance he spotted Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko, both geared up but looking far more weary than they had the day before. As he approached, Ryosuke forced a smile, stifled a yawn behind his hand, and called out, "Hey, you're up early today." Nathan gave them a knowing look instead of answering. "You two look like you didn't sleep much last night," he observed. Shizuko's eyes were shadowed with dark circles. She glanced at the ground, cheeks pink with embarrassment. Ryosuke looked away for a moment, then shrugged. "It's nothing," he mumbled. Neither of them wanted Nathan to know how badly they'd been tossing and turning, especially since he seemed as fresh and energetic as ever. Before the awkwardness could stretch any longer, a familiar figure rounded the corner. "Sensei," the three of them called out together. Furukawa nodded in greeting. Good morning, everyone. Ready for today's training? Nathan, Ryosuke, and Shizuko straightened their stances and saluted. Whatever lay ahead, they were all set to give it their best. Furukawa gave them a curt nod, his sharp eyes sweeping over the three of them. He said nothing more until he asked, "Is all your equipment ready?" "Yes," they answered in unison. "All right, let's move." With that, Furukawa took off toward the village outskirts. Nathan, Ryosuke, and Mizutani Shizuko fell in behind him without a word. The trail stretched on beneath their feet as the four of them marched in silence. Gradually, the tension in Ryosuke and Shizuko's shoulders eased, the monoto, nigh of the trek settling them into a steady rhythm. Hours passed. Dusk was settling over the land when they finally came to a stop a few hundred meters from Little Black Mountain. They'd pressed on since dawn without a single break. Although their pace hadn't been rushed, every step had worn them down. Nathan leaned on his staff, breathing heavily, while Ryosuke rattled his armor with each exhale. Shizuko fared worst of all. She swayed on her feet, nearly paralyzed by exhaustion. Among the four, she was undoubtedly the weakest. If not for sheer force of will, she would have collapsed long before now. As for Furukawa, he merely stretched his back and glanced at the mountain ahead, completely unfazed. For a jonin of his caliber, this level of exertion was nothing more than a morning stroll. Nathan's body, now bolstered by his recent training, felt more powerful than that of any ordinary person. His chakra reserves were abundant, and aside from some labored breathing, he showed no signs of serious fatigue. Ryosuke and Shizuko Mizutani, by comparison, were still far from peak condition. Ryosuke fared a bit better than Shizuko. He hadn't completely run out of strength, but both knew they wouldn't hold up well in a fight just yet. Furukawa, sensing their limits, withheld any rash orders. Had he demanded an immediate assault on the bandits, Nathan would have been forced to go it alone. Instead, he gave them a reprieve. "Use this time to recover. We'll launch the mission in 2 hours." Ryosuke and Shizuko sank gratefully to the forest floor. From their ninja toolkits, they each produced a soldier's ration pill, bite-sized compressions of concentrated nutrients, and popped one into their mouths. They chewed deliberately, swallowed, then leaned back against the trunk of a nearby tree, closing their eyes as they let the medicine work. Nathan accepted his own ration pill with a nod and swallowed it. But while the others rested, he climbed nimbly into the branches above. As dusk settled, he retrieved a compact monocular telescope, something he'd purchased that very morning, and trained it on the distant silhouette of Xiaoheishan. With each shifting shadow and subtle movement below, he pieced together the bandits' likely positions and patrol routes. 2 hours, he thought. That would be just enough time to finalize his plans. Nathan had no detection ninjutsu, so for the moment his only option was simple observation. He stole a glance at Furukawa and wondered why his teammate was so on edge. The answer was straightforward. On the journey here, Sensei Guchuan had warned them that once they arrived, he would offer neither guidance nor intervention. This mission was theirs alone. That caution explained Nathan's vigilance. From their vantage point on the mountain ridge, he watched the bandits below, expecting them to lie low, and was surprised when they charged instead. How had the outlaws learned of their presence? Nathan considered the worst. Maybe Guchuan had quietly tipped them off to raise the stakes. After all, a veteran ninja could do it without breaking a sweat. But then Nathan shook his head. Guchuan wasn't that reckless. He valued practical training above all, and wanted his students to become self-reliant fighters, fast, but never beyond what they could bear. Nathan realized he'd misread the situation. Sensei's silence wasn't indifference, it was confidence in their abilities, tempered by an awareness of their limits. Now, with the bandits closing in, Nathan and Furukawa were about to prove just how well they could fare on their own. Nathan wasn't the only one feeling the strain. Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko had already been pushed to their psychological and physical limits by the relentless pressure. There was really no need for any superfluous moves. Yet when Furukawa caught sight of Nathan's calculated actions, even his usually impassive expression betrayed him with a slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. He'd instantly understood Nathan's reasoning. Am I completely crazy? Furukawa wondered, recalling his own last newt decision. Apparently not, because it worked. If anything, it deepened his respect for Nathan. Anyone could train hard, but it took true discipline to pair effort with humility and patience, to tackle every task with care and focus. That, Furukawa reminded himself, was the ninja's truest skill, no matter where or when. If he had to bet on which of the three would survive a real battlefield, it would be Nathan without hesitation. His level-headedness was his greatest weapon. Raw strength meant little in a meat grinder of a fight. Even a seasoned jonin could fall, let alone a genin. "I just hope they all make it through this," Furukawa murmured. With a soft sigh, he tore his gaze away from Nathan, leapt to another towering tree, and resumed his watch over the distant training ground. His gaze pierced the mountains and forests, revealing shinobi from every village locked in fierce combat along the front line.